Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the third part of What If Deku Had Electric Heart. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. School had been out for an hour and all the students had gone home. Even the one that had started for after-school training was starting to pack up and leave, meaning the trio was left to themselves as Toshinori had easily gotten them permission to use gym beta. Gaizan was counting on this, so before either of the one-for-all users arrived, Gaizan did some warm-up. He dropped his backpack and jacket to the floor. He then loosened his tie a bit and began to practice his form. Gaizan SWCH behind the different martial forms that he knew. And every time he made a move, Gaizan could see Namu, the hideous creature with its large purple body and its exposed brain. Now Gaizan didn't fear the Namu. He had lived, and Class 1 had survived, and that all he needs to have his mind be at peace. Yet every time Gaizan threw a punch, he could imagine it. Namu stood in front of him, but in his mind, the creature didn't have shock nullification, so with every punch Namu went flying. When Namu finally disappeared from Gaizan's mind, his last punch sent it deep into the heart of the North Pole. Gaizan took a deep breath, then he fell to the handstand. He had known one for gymnastics and he only practiced Parker to help with his past life. Yet he always found this position calming. Even with the BLD rushing to his head, his mind was able to calm down. Then Gaizan heard the door opening behind him. With a sigh, he flipped himself out of his handstand and landed on his feet. He brushed some dust over his shoulder and grabbed his jacket off the floor. He FLC-curled it off and then tied the sleeves around his waist. He then turned to greet Ochako and Toshinori, and with a sarcastic tone said, "Well, you must be desperate to come here." Toshinori stopped walking while Ochako scoffed and spoke back in an equally sarcastic tone. "We're not expecting much from you, but you better not make this a waste of time." Gaizan nodded as he grabbed a water bottle from his backpack and took a sip. "Alright, the UA Sport Festival is in a month. That's our timeline and the benchmark you need to reach Hiraraka to be able to control the percent of one for all you summon." Ochako tilted her head. "Remember what I said, using 100% of our strength can damage our body. You need to learn how to hold back and use one for all at a level that doesn't break you. Okay, right now you're currently using 0%. Gaizan slipped his water bottle back into his backpack, which he threw so it landed next to the door. Ochako looked from the backpack to Gaizan. "Shouldn't we change into our costume, at least our gym clothes? We won't be fighting, so there's no need to." Yet despite this, Gaizan was stretching his shoulder, then pointed his fingers at Ochako. "When you gain enough control, then I might let you try a punch, but we'll see. To begin, take off your backpack, your jacket and shoes." Ochako paused for a second, then began taking off the requested items. She stored her jacket and shoe in her backpack and then tossed them a bit away. Ochako then turned back to face Gaizan. "I want you to take a minute and relax." Ochako CC'd an eyebrow in confusion, not understanding where Gaizan was going with this. As Gaizan rolled his shoulder and cracked his neck by twisting it, he said, "Humor me." Ochako sighed, then undid her tie, throwing it onto her backpack, then undid the top button of her collar, allowing her body to more freely breathe. She took a breath and allowed her arm to drop and loosely hang by her side. It took a while, but the entire time Ochako held a slow breathing pattern and soon her entire body was relaxed. Something Gaizan immediately took notice of. Ochako had fully entered a relaxed state, meaning she was well versed in meditation. Perfect, that would help lay a foundation for controlling one for all. A few moments later, Ochako could hear her own heartbeat and feel a small breeze coming through some of the cracked windows. The stress of the day and training began to smoothly flow out of her body and disappeared into the air. Mr. Aizawa had been relentless in pushing Class 1 to find their limits and to better themselves for the festival. The only more relaxed she could have been was if she was in a hot spring. "Now I want you to focus on your arms and legs. Feel the muscles and the tendons, how some are stretched and some are loose. Feel your heart and the BLD it pumps throughout your body," Gaizan said as he let out a deep breath. "Are you about to go Mr. Miyagi on me?" Ochako asked, interrupting Gaizan as she looked him in the eyes. This wasn't a movie, so Ochako didn't believe in the method that if one could think of it, they could do it. "Focus. And yes, my fighting style is varied, but the base is martial arts and the key to martial arts is balance of energy. Kai, aura, life force, call it whatever you want to. Our quirk gives us super strength and speed. However, in their simplest form, our quirks give us more of this energy that we can use to enhance our strength and speed. However, the human body is only able to handle so much energy at once. Moreover, if your channels are blocked, then that energy can become stagnant power, possibly resulting in it becoming harder to control one for all. And that is why control is important even with our body adapting to quirk through the years. At the end of the day, we are still human." Gaizan paused, then asked, "Are you familiar with hysterical strength?" Ochako paused. She only heard the term in passing and heard more stories than what it meant. Heard stories from before quirks. Mother lifting cars off of their kids. Ochako said, then she took a slow deep breath in and then slowly exhaled. Gaizan laughed a bit. I've heard those stories too. They always make it seem that the car was lifted off the ground, when in reality it was just one end of the car. But yes, medically speaking, the human body places limits on its physical strength, not allowing anyone to use more than 80% of their true strength at one time. Hysterical strength is the term for when in a stressful situation, a car on their kid, someone pushes past that limit and uses their full strength. With our quirk it is easy to reach hysterical strength, something we both did against Namo. By using hysterical strength we forced our limits into overdrive, and as the result of doing so our muscles wear and torn, our bones broken, destroying our bodies. This is why you must learn how to control One for All's energy so that does not happen again. Gaizan explained. Okay, Ochako said as she somewhat understood Gaizan's explanation. She recalled when she first started helping her parents at work. Whenever she lifted something heavy, she always felt that she should be stronger, like she wasn't using her full strength. By Gaizan's explanation, she was stronger but her body was stopping herself from tearing a muscle. Good. Now you told me earlier your parents work in construction. Gaizan watched as Ochako's finger flickered at the small breeze. It showed her mind and body were working as one, taking and processing everything simultaneously. She felt the world around her, the breeze, and maybe she could learn to sense others' energy the same way Gaizan's recent upgrade had given him. But most importantly, she began to sense the energy within herself. She could sense zero gravity pulled around her hands, but One for All spread throughout her body. Yes, they have their own company, Ochako said, remembering the conversation they had before lunch. She was still a little ticked off by how he acted, but now was not the time to bring that up. Good. I want you to close your eyes and picture a 100-story building. It doesn't matter what kind of building or what it looks like. You have a picture. Gaizan thought back to his days of training in martial arts while his father was out working. He couldn't have gone to a dojo, so he was mostly self-taught, but luckily the basics had come easy to him. Yes, Ochako was picturing a large apartment building. It had a traditional Japanese style to the exterior, with a more modern one on the interior. The front lobby had a hand-carved wooden desk with a spiral marble counter. The floor was tiled in a pattern to show the sun setting over a mountain range. A quiet wall waterfall filled the lobby with the sound of rushing water. How many rooms are on each floor? Gaizan asked. 20. Why? Ochako asked. She couldn't tell if she was more confused at the order Gaizan was asking these questions or how she knew each floor had 20 rooms. 2 more questions she would have to come back to later. Now you are currently in the lobby, the ground floor. You are at the front desk ready to check in. Now I want you to summon One for All, Gaizan said, his voice becoming soft, almost hypnotic. Ochako walked forward to the front desk as a hotel key appeared on the counter. She grabbed the key and she felt her entire body flex. At first, it was only her natural strength, but then she felt One for All begin to pour into her body. All the lights within the lobby turned bright, but then Ochako felt her body begin to move. Her vision became blurry for a second, then she stepped out of the elevator onto a new floor. You are now on floor 100. You are using One for All at 100%. Gaizan said as he felt One for All flare up in Ochako's body, but then he noticed something off about its flow. Something is off. This confused Ochako as she didn't understand how Gaizan could tell what was going on with One for All. She remembered he expressed his belief that he could now sense quirks, but he hadn't really explained that new ability of his. Ochako shook her eyes as her vision was starting to become fuzzy and she relaxed a bit as floor 100 came back into focus. The hallway carpet was expensive white linen with a pattern that made the carpet appear to be dancing in the light. The lights were modern and had a sunset glow to them that helped with the illusion of the carpet. The doors were dark brown walnut with golden numbers on the frames. Ohako turned around and walked to the windows that she noticed were cut and sectioned perfectly to give the illusion that it was one glass pane spanning the entire height of the building. She walked up to the window and peered down. Far below her, she could see the ground, barely making out the parking lot and the entrance of the hotel. Ochako smiled as she looked down. She felt One for All continuing to fill her body. Yet then the lights behind her began to flicker. Ochako quickly turned around and saw the first light to burn it. It flashed a bright light, then went out. Then she looked at the second one. She willed it to stay on, to stop flickering, but that too flashed and then went out. Each light she turned to would flash and then go out. What's the matter? Gaizan asked, noticing the frown on Ochako's face and the fluctuation of One for All's power. The lights, they're starting to flicker and go out. They need to be turned off and replaced. I'm losing control of One for All, Ochako said. She had helped her parents repair old buildings and the first thing they replaced was the lights. It helped show the state of the electrical wires, but it also provided light for the rest of the job. Allow them to burn out, Gaizan said, knowing that they would come back to this moment to explain problems in the future. Yet it was important that Ochako let the light burn out. Why? Ochako asked. Kaizen had offered to help, but all he had done was tell her what she already knew how to do, just in a new way. Allow them to burn out, Kaizen repeated, his voice taking on a more stern tone. He had reasons, but if he tried to explain them, it could confuse Ochako even more. Ochako needed to let the light burn out and feel the loss of control. Ochako wanted to focus on the light and make them turn back on. But as she did this, more and more light went out. Very soon all the lights were out and Ochako felt her body get pulled back. She soon was standing back in the lobby, the sound of the waterfall filling her ears followed by the sound of a bell. Ochako turned to look at the front desk and saw the hotel key materialize, waiting for her to pick it up again. Ochako's body gave out as she fell to her knees, but she kept her eyes closed. She was struggling to keep the image in her mind, and if she opened her eyes then it disappeared, and she didn't know if she would be able to create it again. What just happened? Toshinori asked as he moved to help Ochako, but Kaizen stopped him by putting his hand on Toshinori's shoulder, palm open and pointing up. Toshinori looked harshly at Kaizen for stopping him from giving aid to his successor, but Kaizen's hand laying gently on his shoulder felt more weight than the world. Ochako just experienced the full extent of One for All. However, since she can't control it, her grip on it becomes loose and she can no longer control it. A person needs a strong foundation before building upon it. Uraraka must start from the beginning. Now Uraraka, do you remember how 100% felt? Kaizen said, looking at Toshinori before back at Ochako. Yes, Ochako, as she wiped the sweat from her forehead and stood up. She had memorized the feeling. It filled her with so much power. She wasn't going to forget that feeling anytime soon. Good. Now, without grabbing the key, I want you to walk up out of the lobby and into the hallway of the first floor, Kaizen instructed. Ochako turned, mentally and physically, and mentally walked away from the front desk. She passed the common area where breakfast would typically be held. However, as she reached the hallway she was stopped. Ochako put a hand out and it felt as if she was pushing against a wall. She tried harder, but she was still kept from entering the hallway. The lights around her flickered, but never fully turned on. Was One for All barring her from leaving the lobby? It was All Might's power. Didn't he want her to be able to learn how to use it? What happened? Kaizen asked, withdrawing his hand away from Toshinori. Ochako sighed, then answered, I ran into some kind of invisible wall. One for All won't let me leave the lobby. Kaizen thought for a moment. There are several possibilities of what the wall represented. 1. Ochako's mind was putting a limit on One for All, since knew if she tried to use One for All she would wind up hurting herself, but if that was true then she wouldn't have been able to visualize the top floor. That formed a new thought in Kaizen's head. One for All was a unique quirk in the fact that it could be passed from person to person to increase its power. What if power wasn't the only thing it stockpiled? Ochako hadn't accepted the quirk, so the quirk wasn't accepting her. If that theory was right, then that hurdle would have to be cleared before Ochako could make any progress in gaining control over One for All. Kaizen took a step towards Ochako and grabbed her hand. Now don't get the wrong idea, Kaizen said, as his quirk flowed between his and Ochako's hand. Ochako laughed a bit at Kaizen's comment but stopped as she felt Kaizen's quirk starting to flow into her body. Was this what he had done to extend All Might's hero form during the USJ attack? Kaizen closed his own eyes, feeling One for All within Ochako's body. It was strong to locate as she wasn't currently using it, but then it began to mix with Kaizen's energy. As their quirk mixed, Kaizen suddenly felt One for All enter his mind and fill it with a black void. Kaizen mentally stood up and looked around. He saw nothing, so clearly this wasn't his mind, otherwise there would be some kind of landscape. Kaizen always liked to think his mindscape would take the form of his old favorite park from his childhood. Yet there was nothing. Then suddenly a teal light formed in front of him and pushed him away. You are not one of us. You enter without permission from the users, a voice said, driving an ice pick into Kaizen's mind as it spoke. Kaizen did his best not to show his discomfort and his confusion at the voice. Kaizen slowed himself from being pushed and looked at the teal light, which was starting to take the form of a human. You're right, I am not a wielder of One for All, but I have come here to provide aid to the ninth wield, Kaizen told the voice. The teal light suddenly rushed forward to attack Kaizen. Kaizen was ready to defend himself and if needed counter. Yet this wasn't his mind, but all for once. There was no way of telling him if he was able to use his quirks. Yet Kaizen didn't have to find out if the teal light was intercepted by a red light. Allow him to help. First, the ninth has struggled to learn from the eighth. Look inside this invader. He might be of great assistance to her now and in the future. I believe it would be for the best to see how this plays out, a more controlled voice said as the red light kept the teal light from reaching Kaizen. The teal light backed off, then a few moments later Kaizen felt the ice prick become removed from his mind, allowing him to breathe. Are you saying Toshinori isn't a good teacher? A feminine voice said, with a defensive tone. A gray light appeared behind the red light. The red light appeared to turn around, and then it flew a bit away from the gray light as if dodging an attack. No better than you, the red light said as it floated a little more away from the gray light. I think we can all agree that the 8th was never one that was meant to be a mentor, said a green light as it appeared between the red and gray one. We are lucky that this newcomer has appeared. Yes, we can all see their history, but that is what makes him valuable to the coming fighting. His history isn't that different from yours first, yet you feel the need to act harshly to the kid. The red light said, then seemed to laugh, but stopped when the gray light turned a bit brighter. Gaizan looked back at the teal light, it being the one in charge. Leave us for now. The 9th struggles to accept her responsibility, so she is not ready to know of our existence. But another has spoken for you and has convinced me to agree with the 5th's belief for this and allow you to guide the 9th until she unlocks one for all true power. To begin, I'll do this, the teal light said. Gaizan took a knee and bowed his head, showing his thanks. Then Gaizan felt himself moving backwards at high speed, being forced out of the black void. But right before he was cut off, he felt the chaos of energy begin to settle. I'm in the hallway, Ochako said, causing Gaizan to open his eyes, dismissing all he had just experienced, planning on coming back to it later. Gaizan let go of Ochako's hand and stepped back, his job known for that part. Good, what do you see? Gaizan asked. Ochako looked around. It was the same as the hallway from the top floor, yet it was strong to notice any detail as the lights were off and there was no light coming from the windows. It's dark, the lights are off. She focused on the hallway lights and they slowly flickered to life. Gaizan watched red energy lines appear over Ochako's chest. Now focus on the rooms. Don't worry about the other floors, just turn this floor on and nothing else. Ochako nodded and turned her focus to the room. 20 doors swung open and lights within the room slowly turned on, starting at the end of the hallway and slowly coming towards her. After 2 minutes, all the lights on the first floor were turned on. As this occurred, Gaizan watched more red lines appear around Ochako's body. Once the last light turned on, the red energy lines disappeared and were replaced with a pink aura. He had seen that occur at the USJ, but as he was more forced on the Namu, he hadn't internalized it. Now that he could focus on it, he guessed it was a show that Ochako was using one for all properly. It was another full minute of Ochako having her pink aura stay steady before Gaizan spoke again. Ochako, remember this feeling and open your eyes. Ochako opened her eyes and saw the pink light surrounding her body. She slowly raised her arms and flexed her hands. She could feel the power within them. If she felt this strong with only the first floor, she couldn't imagine how strong she would feel as she worked up the floors. But how? Toshinori asked. He was at a loss for words. When Nana Shimura passed one for all to him, he was able to use 100% of it. So when it was clear Ochako couldn't do the same, he didn't know how to teach her. He had talked with his old teacher, but his advice didn't do much. His letter spent more time belittling Toshinori for his inability to teach. Now here stood Gaizan Hisahito, a first-year high schooler with more than a questionable history, who had only truly known about one for all for under a month, only seen it used once or twice, and never had a chance to process its power for himself. Yet he seemed to have a better understanding of it than its current users and was able to teach Ochako more in 20 minutes than Toshinori was able to do in a year. Toshinori couldn't hide his glances over at Gaizan. He was so mature for his age. Did his past have anything to do with that? And he was powerful too. He stood his ground against the Namu by himself for a bit. Toshinori thought about Eraserhead's advice at the beginning of the year. The always tired teacher talks about how the students hadn't had a chance to use their quirks every day. Many of them won't know their limits or have complete mastery over their quirks. But the second piece of advice spoke to the symbol of peace at the moment. Since classes 1A and 1B were now using their quirk on a daily basis, their quirks were bound to grow. Like muscles at the start of a workout, it would be slow, but eventually they would begin to strengthen rapidly. Toshinori looked at Gaizan. If he was already this strong and smart, how would he be at graduation? Could he be able to stand by Ochako, perhaps as her equal? Was one for all no longer alone in its strength? A question for later as Gaizan began explaining his thoughts. Each floor represents a percentage of one for all. As the lights turn now on each floor, you use that level of power. However, the rooms went out, meaning the different parts of your body were using different levels of one for all. This results in a domino effort of Uraraka losing control over one for all. By forcing one for all to the first floor, Uraraka is forcing it to flow evenly through her body. A person, neither a building nor an army, can stand if they do not first have a strong foundation to build everything upon. Now release one for all, Gaizan said, and Ochako did so. The pink aura around her disappeared. Ochako felt a small wave of exhaustion hit her. It was different but felt similar to the nausea she felt from zero gravity. Now I want to see you summon 1% of one for all throughout your body again. Ochako nodded and closed her eyes. The hallway's lights immediately turned up, while the doors were slow to open and the lights to come on. But overall it was much faster than last time. She was starting to get used to the feeling of using one for all at 1%, meaning she could find that feeling easier. Now dodge this, Gaizan said in a calm tone. Ochako opened her eyes and saw Gaizan throwing a punch. Ochako panicked and let go of One for All. She tried to react, but in her confusion, Gaizan was able to stop his fist an inch away from Ochako's face. He had stopped when he noticed the pink aura disappear and felt One for All because subdued. What was that for? Ochako yelled, pushing Gaizan's fist away from her face. She was ready to return the favor, but actually make contact. She might not be able to use One for All to attack, but she still had a mean right hook. A few of the bullies at her old school learned that the strong way. You lost focus. Focusing on One for All now and during combat will be two extremely different experiences. I want you to work on summoning One for All until it becomes second nature. That way you can focus on the fight in front of you, Gaizan calmly said as he threw a punch at Ochako's gut. Ochako panicked and powered up to 100%. Gaizan stopped as he felt One for All flare up. And not allow yourself to act on instinct alone. You have only had this power for a while, but that doesn't mean we as your classmates are going to stop and wait for you to catch up. You have to work harder than anyone else. If you don't, then all might pick the wrong successor. Ochako's anger flared up at Gaizan's comment. She quickly slapped him in the face, activating her zero-gravity quirk. She then summoned 1% of One for All and hit him in the chest. She had dealt with his careless attitude all day long and she was starting to get ticked off by it. Gaizan didn't go flying as suspected, but slowly went floating back. I think that only filled out about 0.5% of my tank. You're going to have to punch harder than that to fight me. Ochako growled as she cancelled zero gravity and took a step towards Gaizan, ready to unleash her fury on her classmate. While Gaizan could most likely handle himself, Toshinori had seen how furious Ochako could get when she was mad, so he buffed up to his hero form and held back Ochako. It was 2 weeks before UAS Sports Festival, and since Izuku was able to sustain flight, he had moved to the next part of his hero suit. While the repulsor and exoskeleton gave him super strength and speed, he was still just a human, meaning he would need to be able to defend himself, meaning he needed armor. Video number 4 start. Alrighty, after further testing the repulsor boot, Mark II, sustained flight is achievable, meaning it's time to move on to the next stage of Project Hero Suit. Izuku walked into the frame carrying a piece of metal that looked like a medieval cest piece, along with a mannequin. He walked further from the camera, where more mannequins had been set up, each with a similar metal cest piece to the one Izuku was carrying. Because I am still a student of UA and I live in Japan, most forms of lethal weaponry that do not deal with quirks are not allowed. Luckily, I am allowed the repulsors because their main purpose for flight. The concussive force is just a beneficial addition. Izuku set the mannequin on the floor and then slipped the cest piece over it. He then tightened the straps, making the cest piece snugly hug the mannequin, and then checked the other cest pieces. Yeah, beneficiation addition. Didn't you make your gauntlets to destroy the robots for the hero course entrance exam? Snipe scuffed out of frame. He had been approached by Izuku 2 days ago. His request was strange, shooting bullets at metal cest pieces, and once Principal Nezu requested the same, Snipe couldn't just say no. One out of fear of Izuku hurting himself, 2 Snipe's curiosity started to peak. Powerloader gave small updates about Izuku and his project, but the support course teacher kept mostly quiet as if he was afraid that the teacher would warn Class 1A. Whether Izuku Midoriya was a threat to Class 1A and 1A, Snipe didn't fully believe he was, so he had agreed to get a better idea of what Izuku was working on. If Izuku was a threat to the hero course students, would Snipe warn them? No, he would enjoy seeing their looks of surprise. True, but they were originally designed for flight. Speaking of allowing lethal weaponry, today we have Pro Hero and UA teacher Snipe. Today we'll test different materials for the armor for Project Hero Suit. A copycat design showed that normal metal such as steel can be effective, however it must be thick, thus resulting in heavier armor and will not allow sustained flight. Izuku said, "We're checking the last check piece." Once he red-tightened one of the straps, he began walking back towards the camera. A big smile was evident on his face, and May would testify that Izuku had held that smile since figuring out his boots. Do you have to spell everything out? Besides, who is even going to watch these? Snipe looked at the camera. He understood why the media recorded everything. It was literally their job to spread the news. Then again, Izuku didn't seem to be doing that. It was as if he was making a digital journal. Engineers run the risk of copyright a lot in their career. To help determine who truly invented something first, engineers use dated notebooks and videos. Midoriya here is making these videos to be stored in UA archives, so future support students know the power they hold, Powerloader said, as he helped load the different ammunition Snipe would be firing. They had firearms ranging from the standard 9mm to more heavy-duty ammunition such as assault rifles and shotguns. How did Principal Nezu get a hold of these so quickly, especially when most firearms were banned in Japan? The thought the guns were actually Principal Nezu's and he had them on hand and ready to use at any time crossed Snipe's mind. And I can review them to find issues that I missed on the first go. Kind of like paper versus practice, Izuku said, disappearing from the camera's view. He stepped behind the table with all the different guns, looking them all over as Power Loader finished loading all of them. I think that's the first thing I understood coming out of either of yours months since you first asked me to help you, Snipe said. So all I need is to fire different ammunition into the metal-cessed pieces you have, and then we see what kind has better stopping power. In layman's terms, yes, Power Loader said as he and Izuku stepped behind some bulletproof glass. And in Japanese, Snipe asked, then immediately regretted it. We're testing the impact and tensile strength of each type of metal. We test to see which one can strand the highest ammunition type and which one can handle the most bullets before it bends, snaps, or deforms. Then we'll be testing varying thicknesses and comparing weight to see which one is the best option for protection while still allowing for sustained flight, Izuku said as he grabbed a pair of earmuffs and a pair of goggles. Safety first, as a lesson he was still trying to teach Mei. So you aren't min-maxing. That was all Snipe got from the explanation. Yes, along that logic, we are finding the balance between stats, Izuku said, then slipped on the pair of earmuffs and the safety goggles. All right, range at hot, fire at will. I think you're the first support student that understands safety, Snipe said, loading a magazine into a 9mm pistol, trying not to laugh at the knowing nod that Power Loader gave. He chambered around and aimed at the far right-cessed piece. He then pointed the trigger and the bullet went flying. The bullet went flying through the air and went through the carbon fiber-cessed piece. Why did we put that one out there? Power Loader asked as carbon fiber was practically useless against any bullet that used gunpowder. Izuku shrugged his shoulders, had to have some kind of baseline. Video number 4 end. After much testing with Snipe and several bullets cleaned off the ground, a suitable metal was found. Izuku spent the next day building the files and then sent them to the machines under classroom 6G. Now he just had to wait to assemble everything. The assembling went by quickly and Izuku had the suit ready a week before the sports festival. Video number 5 start. Alright, this will be the last test before the UAS Sports Festival, but I can promise it will be a good one. After many tests with Pro Hero Snipe, we have discovered that using gold titanium alloy will provide the best results for withstanding kinetic force from bullets, while its weight will still allow sustained flight to be achieved, as it only has to be 8mm thick to withstand most firearms. However, for heavier loads than the standard calibers, the thickness has to be increased to 12mm. Both options are light enough. However, I am a broke high school student and would not be able to afford enough gold titanium alloy to make a suit 12mm thick. However, after making many pointless promises to Mr. and Mrs. Hatsume of Hatsume Industries and to Power Loader and Principal Nezu of UA, I finally have enough to create a suit. Izuku chuckled a bit as he walked into the frame wearing a full suit of gold armor. The suit covered his entire body, and he held the helmet in his hands. I know the color is tacky, but it is the same stuff used on tactical satellites. So should I choose to up into the upper atmosphere, I shouldn't have to worry the cold dead air of space causing ice to form over my suit. But more for myself than anything else, I can definitely promise a change in color will be done before the sports festival. However, despite the horrible color, once the final piece was done, I couldn't wait to try the whole suit out. I spent all night assembling the last few pieces of the suit, and I might have gotten in trouble for not paying attention in class. Izuku held his arms and hand out as if presenting himself like a trophy, allowing the camera to get a good look at the front suit. He spun around showing off the rest of the suit, but the embarrassed look never disappeared from his face. The suit hugged his figure, only buggling the thigh and lower forearm, as to add space for additional weaponry and in the cess to house and protect the arc reactor. Once he was further in high school, or he might have to wait until he was a pro hero, but eventually he would fill the empty space with the weaponry. Until then he had some idea of what to do that he was allowed to build and use. I think it looks good. Mei chuckled, and she had been since the first time she saw the full suit. Izuku hadn't allowed her to take any photos yet and she probably won't be able to watch the video, but she had already burned the image into her mind. You look like a full gold All Might. I beg of you for the nth time, please shut up. I'm already embarrassed about the color. I don't need to be hearing it from you, Izuku said, a small blush appearing on his cheeks, and it didn't help that Mei stuck her tongue out at him. He groaned as he fidgeted with his helmet, before resuming with the test. It's tacky and not very professional. Besides, I look better in green. That we agree on, Mei mumbled under her breath, then looked at the camera, becoming worried that its microphone might have caught her words. But again, Izuku never really let her watch the videos, so she would probably never find out. Let's move on to the actual test. Jabesu, are you connected? Izuku asked. He raised the helmet up to speak into it. After a second, the eye turned on a dim blue light filled with the helmet. It blinked in and out for a few moments, before becoming a steady light. The small light illuminates the inside of the helmet, reflecting off the soft form grip that Mrs. Hatsume had suggested so the helmet would stay steady on Izuku's head as he moved around. For you, sir, Always, Jebisu spoke from the speakers within the helmet. Good. Izuku slipped the helmet on and a second later a blue light scanned his face and it turned green, signaling the biometric scan was working properly. Identification verified. Izuku Midoriya, Jebisu said, and Izuku felt the form grip form to his head, patted down his fluffy hair and formed to his skull. Run a full diagnostics check. The internal heads-up display filled Izuku's vision. It had a large amount of code, slowly being filtered through as it showed off the different functions of the suit. Wiring pulsing as electricity moved to the different parts of the suit. Another showed the exoskeleton with all its joints and hydraulics. Then lastly, the outline of the suit finished as the different pieces of armor appeared, the ones meant for defense and ones that had the other purpose of helping to steer while flying. On the outside, the different pieces of armor moved around, testing to make sure everything was put together and nothing was stuck. The forearms opened up to reveal empty slots that would fit small missiles and other weaponry. The calf and thigh flaps opened and closed, while the shoulder flaps moved in and out. Everything looks good on the outside, Mei said, giving a thumbs up from behind the camera. Having used her quirk, zoomed to watch the intricate hinges and flaps of the suit move in perfect sync. She had spent many nights with Izuku and even saw him working late nights on his own working on his suit, getting everything perfect. Nothing was out of place, the timing of everything down to the last millisecond. Izuku always said the suit was his life goal, and he had just arrived at the starting line. Time to launch the starting pistol. Izuku nodded to her. Then Jebisu spoke up. First sweep of internal coding is clear and suit functionality is at 100%. Shutting down to finish fully diagnostics. What? Izuku asked as the lights in his helmet were starting to dim. He wasn't expecting this, nor did he want this. He wanted to fly and nothing was going to stop him. He had waited long enough. Safety checks BGMI. Izuku could come back to that thought and realized in much dread he was starting to become like Mei. Sir, there is all terabytes of data to go through before the first test is done. It will be at least 2 hours before everything is done, Jebisu warned. He had been programmed to keep Izuku safe, and allowing Izuku to fly a multi-million-dollar suit without it properly being tested first was something he could not allow. Yeah, no. MSDR command 1A7B2H0MA. Izuku said, and after a second the lights within the helmet brightened again and the HUD reappeared. Will start small. Not more than a simple aerial maneuver. Right away, sir, Jebisu said, and returned complete control back to Izuku. Izuku rolled his finger and said, we'll start with 2%. This was more for the camera as Jebisu was about to read Izuku's thoughts through the senses in the helmet. Izuku held his hand up to his side and after a second all 4 repulsors ignited and Izuku began to slowly lift off the ground. He hovered around the gym, the camera following him around, making Mei have to walk around in a circle to stay out of view. Izuku tried some flips and barrel rolls. Nothing too difficult on paper, but he quickly found out how strong they were as he nearly ran into the walls a few times. After 10 minutes of flying around, Izuku returned to his initial point and dropped down to the ground. He landed on the ground with a thud echoing through the gym. The faceplate flipped up and Izuku was wearing a massive grin. Sir, shall I commence full diagnostics? Jebisu asked and Izuku had to think about it. Izuku thought flying around the gym would be enough to see where his skills were. But all that flying just made him want to see the limits of his suit. On paper, they look good, but in life, the limits are never the same. Izuku looked up at the sky. Nearly 7 months since he began working on his father's design, and nearly 2 years since he had regained his dream of becoming a hero. Time to see how far he had come. Nah. Izuku FLC curved his head down, the faceplate responding and closing. Make sure the airspace is clear. Let's go for a ride. What are you doing? They asked. She had heard Izuku's side of the conversation but not Jebisu's response. You aren't seriously thinking about flying around UA. It's restricted airspace. I got permission from Principal Nezu. I'll be fine. Besides, sometimes you have to run before you can walk, Izuku said, then took off. The force of liftoff knocked the camera and tripod over, along with Mei. Izuku, I'm going to kill you when you get back, Mei said, through the dust cloud. Other sounds of threats and yells could be made out, but it was mostly static. Great, we're going to need a new microphone. Then a small beep could be heard and the dusty side of Gym Gamma turned black, signaling the camera had been turned off. Video number 5 end. Maybe Izuku should admit he was a bit impatient, though he never would. He wasn't going to wait 2 hours for Jebisu to do full diagnostics. Everything looked good on the initial sweep and that was good enough for him. If something was wrong with the suit, Izuku was going to find out now and deal with it later. Though he should have given Mei a warning before taking off. He knew how powerful his repulsors were, and generating enough power to achieve that quick of lift was more than enough power to knock her to the ground. And maybe he shouldn't have gone flying through the roof of Gym Gamma, leaving a good-sized hole in the progress. He had promised Principal Nezu and Powerloader that he would keep property damage to the minimum, as they already had to deal with that a lot from Class 1A. Izuku only looked back momentarily, looking down at the hole he had made, regretting quickly passing as he shot off into the air. He did a few laps around UAS main campus, feeling the speed and power coming from his suit. It was nothing like he expected, meaning its limits were beyond his initial thoughts, and he was going to find what they were. As Izuku flew UAS main building, he stopped and looked down at a class of third years training on one of the outdoor tracks. With the sound of his flying, it didn't take long for the first student to notice him, and the plain-faced student pointed up to Izuku, directing his classmates' attention to Izuku. Feeling the need to give them a show, Izuku waved back and then pointed his head towards the sky. He felt power build up in his repulsor, and then with a blast that neared the sound limit, Izuku quickly shot into the late afternoon sky. As Izuku cleared UAS airspace, he asked, "Jabisu, what is the SR-71 record?" The altitude record for fixed-wing flights is 85 feet, while its speed was Mach 3.32. Jabisu said as the information was pulled up on the right side of the heads-up display. Izuku glanced over at it and knew he could easily suppress that record. Records were made to be broken. Why not see if we can break them today? Izuku said, increased to 25% move. Izuku felt his arc reactor directing more power to the boot. Then he felt his ear pop as his speed increased. The suit began to shake a bit, but then suddenly a sonic boom went off and everything went quiet for a moment. Then the sound of rushing air quietly filled the helmet. Izuku was glad he had noise dampeners in the helmet, or he would have gone deaf, as the sound alone was a good indicator of how fast he was going. A few seconds later, the announcement came from Jabisu. "Congratulations, sir. You have broken the attitude record for fixed-wing flight. Now might I suggest you return to a level of atmosphere where you can breathe." And a small layer of ice has begun to form on the exterior of your suit. Izuku took a breath, alone with his breath being all misty. He could tell the air was starting to get a little thin. That was not a good sign. Then Izuku looked over the horizon. He was high above the clouds and could begin to see the curve of the earth. Where else was he going to get a perfect sight of the horizon? But a small image of his suit appearing on his HUD drew his attention. The armor over his shoulders and abdomen was turning blue. The gold titanium alloy was supposed to take care of that. Gold titanium alloy is usually coated in a thermal paint to better provide heat transfers, Jabisu said as an image of a satellite appeared. Then the layers separated, showing the different layers between the gold titanium alloy and the thermal paint. CRP, Izuku said to himself. He would have to work on that when he got back. So he quickly took one last look around, soaking in the view. Then he flipped himself down and shot down. Going straight down, he could feel the heat coming from the armor, but it was holding up and keeping the heat away from Izuku. And it helped melt the ice, but that shouldn't be Izuku's go-to solution for ice build-up. Izuku knew he needed to slow down as a city came into view and then into focus. He forced his arms downwards and increased his gauntlet's power, slowing his descent as flaps over his shoulder popped out to increase drag, until he stopped a mile above the city, but it wasn't Musutafu. He looked around and recognized it as Fukuoka. He recognized this because this was where his mom's place of business headquarters was. As he overlooked the city, Izuku recalled that Inko had been in the city for the past few weeks, dealing with the issue of her boss missing, something he wasn't supposed to know about. Maybe he could fly over to her work and show off his suit. It might do her some good to know Hisashi's designs weren't for nothing. Jabisu locate phone with the number of -555-8638. Izuku requested. Locating. Jabisu said, warning high-velocity objects at 6 o'clock. Izuku said as he turned himself around. In the distance, he saw a red blur coming towards him, and it was coming in hot. What is that? It was only 11 in the morning, and Hawks had had a late start to the day, clocking in for patrol around 9:30. Yet during that time, he had stopped a robbery and a mugging and helped rescue people from a nasty car crash. Then to top it off, he had spotted a group of villains that were about to go into the mall with plans to blow it up. He couldn't help but laugh at their expressions when his feather suddenly lifted them into the air. But besides the point, he was used to doing this amount of work, but since he had accidentally slept in, he didn't get a full breakfast. So as he flew away from the mall to look for more trouble to handle, his stomach growled. He tried to ignore it, but it continued to growl, and Hawks began to feel his stomach eating his backbone. Fine, you win. How about some fried chicken? Hawks said to himself, as he dropped his shoulders in defeat. He had been hoping to hold out until a reasonable lunchtime, but his hunger was stronger than his willpower. As Hawks rounded a corner, he sighed and pulled out his phone. He hit speed dial 3 with number 2 being reserved for Endeavor and number 1 being for an old friend. The line connected and Hawks moved his goggles to press the phone against his ear. Mr. Hawks, so good to hear from you again. Would you like your usual?" the woman on the other side said. From the woman's voice alone, Hawks felt better and he knew the chicken was the best he ever had. "Yes, please, though can you add some extra wings on the side?" Hawks requested as he flew over a traffic light. He heard a few of his fans call out to him, but his stomach made him focus on getting food. "This breakfast again," the woman cheerily sighed. Hawks hung his head. How did that woman always know? Yes, he sheepishly said. While Ms. Kenkin's quirk worked with food and increasing its quality, Hawks would swear she had a second quirk that let her read people's minds. Though Hawks figured since she had been working at her restaurant for longer than he was alive, she had gained the skills to memorize people's orders and remember the context behind them. I'll make sure to throw in some extra sauce for you. They'll be ready within 20 minutes, Ms. Kenkin said with a small chuckle. You're the best, Ms. Kenkin. May you have a long life and always be able to make chicken delicious, Hawks said. Ms. Kenkin gave a small laugh and said, and you're my favorite customer. Hawks gave a laugh back and then ended the phone call, slipped his phone into his pocket, then readjusted his goggles. Hawks paroled as he made his way over to Ms. Kenkin's restaurant. Once the building was in sight, Hawks lowered himself to the street and walked the distance. He could have easily landed in front, but in the past, he had been chewed out by Ms. Kenkin about scaring her cat and birds. After the third earful, Hawks decided it was just easier to walk in. Hawks got a lot of attention as he walked to the street. He was a top 3 hero for a reason. And while Endeavor beat him in power, Hawks was easily more charismatic and popular. He smiled and waved to everyone who saw him, but soon his stomach demanded he walk faster. Hawks sighed once he reached the restaurant, quickly walking in, and the smell of fried chicken filled his body with energy. The doorbell chimed, alerting Ms. Kenkin, who was behind the counter, to Hawks' presence. Ah, Mr. Hawks, right on time. Your order is ready, Ms. Kenkin said, pulling a bucket of chicken seemingly out of nowhere. Hawks swore to himself that Ms. Kenkin had to have a magic ability for being to produce fried chicken that tasted then mana in such a short period. Magic, not a quirk, because there's no way a quirk this good could exist. As Hawks gave a few scratches to Ms. Kenkin's cat, a fat Maine CN, as Ms. Kenkin put the fried chicken on the counter. Hey, Machai, how are you doing? Hawks said, getting a pleased purr from the cat. Hawks laughed as he walked over to the counter and pulled out his wallet. You're a lifesaver, Ms. Kenkin. You know that. Only for the millionth time you've told me, Ms. Kenkin said, accepting the money from Hawks and ringing him up. Ms. Kenkin handed over the change and the food. Hawks gave a deep bow to show his appreciation, then turned towards the door. He already had a second wing devoured by the time he was outside. Hawks walked across the street. Then, after a fourth chicken wing to his mouth, took off into the sky. Hawks slowly ate the fifth wing as he flew over the city in a quick patrol, then handed over to his favorite spot to eat, which was on top of a large skyscraper, which gave him a good view of the city. Hawks lowered him onto the roof and then began eating his food. He enjoyed the sight of the afternoon sun. As he looked over the city he protected, the city had decided to give Hawks a chance to relax and enjoy himself, allowing him to take a small nap on the skyscraper. He felt the small breeze of the afternoon as he relaxed. He wished he could stay like this for a few, just enjoy the warm sunlight and not have to worry about anything else. But then he was drawn out of his nap as his phone rang. Hawks threw the second to the last wing into his mouth as he pulled out his phone. The piece he had gotten from his nap was instantly gone when he recognized the phone number as the Hero Public Safety Commission. Hawks sighed as he knew he was late for his evaluation, but honestly, he didn't care for it. Yet he knew he already had 2 strikes for the years and couldn't afford any more. He answered the call and acted dumb. Hello, this is Hawks. What can I do for you? We picked something on our sensors and we need you to check it out, the HPSC worker said on the other side, the voice cold and quick, not dealing with the pleasantries of small talk. That was only one of the issues Hawks had with the HPSC. Hawks stretched his neck. It popped a bit and he let out a sigh. Can't you get someone else to do it? I'm eating lunch. He knew he wasn't the only pro hero in the area, nor the only high-ranking one. Yet the HPSC just seemed to enjoy directing all their problems to him. You're the only one that can get it. It's airborne and is going supersonic, the HPSC worker said, and Hawks wasn't all that impressed. And it looks like Sutaku design. So, Hawks said, trying to act like that name didn't mean anything to him. He spat out the wing in his mouth, skillfully landing it in the bucket, before popping the last wing into his mouth. The taste of the wing could do nothing to pass back the annoyance he was getting from the call. Sutaku is dead, so someone has his designs. Get them and bring the suit to us, the HPSC agent said, struggling not to sound frustrated. Hawks smiled at this tiny victory. And that concerns me, why? Hawks asked as he rolled the wing in his mouth. It just stopped above Fukuoka, 2 miles south of your position, the HSPC worker said, as if he knew that would get Hawks off his butt and into the air. Which it did. Hawks didn't respond to the news of a potential villain being in his city. He quickly closed his phone and slipped it into his pocket. He bit down strong on the wing in his mouth and took off. He didn't exactly have a good history with the city he protected, but he loved the people within it. If a villain was going to attack the people, he would have to deal with Hawks. Hawks quickly spotted the villain. Its gold color easily gave it away against the white and blue horizon. Hawks always like it when idiot villains make themselves easily seen, always making his job of looking for them easier. Hawks watched as the villain hovered about the city skyline. It was moving its head around as if it was searching for something. Suddenly the villain turned around and looked at Hawks. With his presence known, Hawks drew his blade. He pulled his wing in close and then pushed them back, increasing his speed forwards. As he got in close, Hawks drew back his blade to be ready to attack. However, the villains didn't move. They kept perfectly still in the air. Hawks didn't miss a beat. He swung his sword, but the villain managed to dodge by dropping. Hawks' eyes followed the motion and he closed his wing to dive after the villain. The villain tried to back up and get away, but Hawks kept him in range. Hawks swung his sword whenever he got in close, but the villains always managed to dodge it. Finally, the villain shot back up into the air. Hawks noticed the light coming from the villain's feet. That must be the villain's method of flight. If Hawks knocked them off, then the villain would be grounded and have no choice but to surrender. As Hawks continued chasing the villain, he shot 2 feather forwards, aiming at the right boot. As the first feather got close, it disintegrated, so Hawks increased the speed of the second feather to make sure it hit before it was burned away. As Hawks' feather hit its mark, the villain stumbled a bit. It dropped through the air a bit before catching himself and continued to try and fly away from Hawks. The villain looked back at Hawks, then shot up into the air, but Hawks was right on his trail. The villain began to try and lower Hawks through the skyscraper, but Hawks had more experience and never lost sight of the villain. Yet the villain had enough speed that Hawks couldn't get any closer, and while Hawks was starting to enjoy the chase, he knew this was over as soon as the villain turned around a building that had an opening between its 2 sides. Hawks quickly shot through the open and met the villain on the other side. The villain stuck its hand out, slowing itself and stopping itself before it ran into Hawks. Hawks readied his feather sword, showing that the villain wasn't to make the wrong move. "You interrupted my lunch." Hawks spat out the last bone to emphasize his point. "I hope you've got a good issue." "Oh my gosh, it's Hawks," the villain said, sounding least starstruck. Hawks wasn't expecting that response, and not in that kind of tone. The villain had come out of nowhere and made Hawks chase him throughout the city. Why did he sound excited to meet Hawks, when Hawks was able to arrest him and was supposed to turn him over to the HPSC? "So you know how I am. Then you know that I fight people who attack his city," Hawks said. He wasn't usually threatening. He never liked to portray himself like that. But having grown up around the HPSC and being a fan of Endeavor from a young age, Hawks knew how to act intimidating. "Wait, hold on," the villain said. Suddenly the faceplate popped open, revealing a high schooler underneath. Hawks were caught by surprise and did a double take. As he looked over at the high schooler, Hawks became very confused. Then he realized the suit was armor. Was this the kid's quirk? And what was he doing in Fukuoka? "All right, you've got 5 seconds to explain," Hawks said, pointing his blade at the high schooler. The high school looked panicked and in a hurried voice asked, "Can I get like 20? Hawks raised an eyebrow at that, as it was the first time he had heard someone ask that. People usually began to rumble, tripping on their tongues as they tried to explain who they were so quickly. Hawks crossed his arms and said, "All right, sure. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm a first-year support student at UA High School. My father created the design for the suit that I'm wearing. This was my first full test flight and I wanted to see what it could do. I must have gotten lost in the upper atmosphere because I'm in Fukuoka now," Izuku said as he looked around, still with no idea of how he got to Fukuoka. He hadn't gone that high that he would get disconnected from the Earth's rotation. "UA, you say? Got any proof?" To Hawks, it was clear that Izuku wasn't a threat. He was just a lost student. But unfortunately, the same couldn't be said for the HPSC. Hawks remembered the HPSC had trouble with Sutaku a few years back. Clearly, they weren't done with him. "I have my ID card with me." "1 second. Izuku looked as if he was reaching into his pocket, but forgot he was wearing his armor. His arm patted his leg, but then he began to wobble, so he quickly held his arm out to brace him and the repulsor turned back on. CRP note to self, make pockets. Hawks sighed as he reattached his blade to his wings. "Sorry kid, if you can't prove yourself, then I'm gonna have to take you in. You're wearing unregistered technology and causing the HPSC a headache." "Wait, HPSC? What does the Hero Public Safety Commission want with me?" Izuku asked, pulling off his helmet with his right hand while using his left to keep him steady. What would the HPSC want with him? He had never gotten in trouble, and the few times that had gotten closer was when Hatsume Industries had to deal with Mei's usual antics. "You are wearing unregistered technology and went supersonic, and if you are to believe, traveled up to the upper atmosphere. And since you're not a pro hero, that's illegal quirk use. Now if you can't prove you're a UA student and that you have permission for this, I will treat you as a thug," Hawks explained. "Wait, hold on, I can prove I'm UA. Just give me a second." Izuku looked down at his helmet and a thought occurred. Jebisu called Principal Nezu. "Dialing Principal Nezu," Jebisu said, catching Hawk's interest at a potential third party in the mix. An assistant to Izuku perhaps would make him an accomplice to all the charges, and the HPSC would want to meet them too. The phone call was picked up on the first dial. Hawks waited, and sure enough, Principal Nezu's voice came through. "Hello, Midori. I was under the impression you were doing a flight test today. What can I do for you? Izuku's voice got stuck in his throat a bit, but he managed to squeak out, yes, Principal Nezu. I'm currently in Fukuoka, trying to convince Hawks that I go to your school. Izuku then shot a concerned look at Hawk. Hawks is in the pro hero, Principal Nezu said, only showing a small bit of surprise, portraying more concern than anything else. Izuku was only supposed to fly around UA, and he had already gotten some notice from the teachers about students who noticed some gold flying fast around UA. Once the call stopped coming in, Principal Nezu had expected to get a call from Izuku or Mei, but it took longer than expected. Hawks flapped his wings, moved closer to Izuku, and looked down at the helmet. He had recognized the voice of Principal Nezu from the first word he said, and there was no way it was fake. Good afternoon, Hawks here. It's good to talk with you, Principal Nezu. Your student here, Izuku Midoriya, says he had permission to test his armor. Yes, he does. However, if he is in Fukuoka, then he is out of my jurisdiction. I only gave him permission to use UAS airspace. Midoriya, how is it that you are Fukuoka? Principal Nezu asked. Wanted to test how high and fast I could fly. Got lost on my way back from the upper atmosphere, Izuku said as he moved his left hand to rub the back of his head. But he stopped himself as he became unbalanced. He would have to work on that. 4 pivot points were enough, but it was over his hands and feet, and it was instinctually to move them. Hawks, would you mind disciplining my student for me? Principal Nezu asked. Hawks gladly biffed Izuku up alongside the head. Now would you mind SCRT my student back to UA? Travel costs will be covered. Just get him back as soon as possible. I can do that, Hawks said, any excuse to lay around and travel. Before the phone call was over, Izuku thought it was prudent that Principal Nezu knew something, as it could become a bigger problem down the road. Principal Nezu, the HSPC noticed my flight. For the first time, Principal Nezu didn't have a reply, which was unusual for him. He had been hoping to keep Project Hero Suit and its completion a secret for a bit longer, at least until the sports festival. That was why Izuku wasn't supposed to leave UA airspace, but now that the HPSC knew about Izuku's suit, they would be furious when Principal Nezu wouldn't hand it over, so he would need to prepare for how they would respond. And with the past shown anytime, it wouldn't be nice and courteous. Now that is a concern, and I assume Hawks was sent to intercept you. Yes, Hawks confirmed. If you could send them my way, I'll explain the situation to them, Principal Nezu said, already preparing himself for the headache that was going to cause. He would need to hold them off until he could coordinate with Powerloader, as he was Hisashi's friend he went to when the HPSC came after him. They also mentioned Sutaku. Now, I don't generally concern myself with things like that from HSPC, but I do have to ask, how do you know about Sutaku? Hawks said, looking at Izuku. Izuku got a sheepish look. Hisashi Sutaku is my father and the one that designed this suit of armor. He left me the design before he died, and I've been working on them at UA. Hawks nodded. Hisashi had rarely brought up his wife and son, and Hawks had never learned their names, but there was no other way Izuku had Hisashi's designs. That's all I need to know. HSPC has been looking for his lab for the past few years. Once they learn of the suit, they are going to come demanding it. They can pry it from my dead cold body, Izuku said as his smile disappeared and he spoke in a strong voice. He had worked strong to make this suit. There was no way he was just going to turn it over. The HPSC could come over him all they wanted. He would just run circles around them. He had spent his life dodging Bakugo. The HPSC was just a bigger bully. Then, as Principal Nezu knew what Izuku was thinking, he said, Midoriya, just get back to you. I will handle the Hero Public Safety Commission and whatever they throw. The best thing for you to do is to come back to UA. Don't worry about the commission, you're focused on Iron Monger. Izuku nodded his head, I will. He then ended the call and slipped his helmet back on. He turned to Hawks and said, mind if we continue this on the ground? You broke one of my repulsors and my others are struggling to keep me airborne, Izuku requested. Hawks nodded and they began to slowly descend to the ground. Hawks landed softly, while Izuku landed with a loud thud. Hawks looked up and down the alleyway they landed in. The train station was a few blocks away. Hawks then turned back to Izuku. There's no way to get that armor off of you, is there? No, not unless you've got my equipment or a Sawbuzz with the same strength as All Might, Izuku said, slipping the helmet back off, catching onto what Hawks was thinking. A full gold suit in the middle of the public would be all over social media. The HPSC would be able to easily follow him to the train station. Let's get you a jacket, Hawks said. Hawks had Izuku wait in an alley as he went across the street where a thrift store was. Hawks quickly went back to the coat section and grabbed the biggest one he could along with a base cap. After paying for them, Hawks made a mad dash back across the street and into the alleyway, where Izuku was found sitting cross-legged and trying to look at the bottom of his right foot. Catch. Izuku looked up and caught the coat and base cap. He attached the helmet to his side, then slipped on the trench coat and then slipped the hat over his hair. As Hawks led Izuku out of the alleyway, he asked, What were you doing? You knocked one of my repulsor offline. I figured I would spend the time figuring out what exactly you broke, so I can repair it and get it working before the sports festival. Izuku said. Sports festival, huh? Well, you're in the hero Kraus. You're going to have eyes on you anyways. Hawks said, but stopped when Izuku shook his head. I'm not in the hero course. I'm actually from the support department. Izuku said. Hawks titled his head. But with that suit you should have been. Should have and probably would have passed, but the problem is I didn't have the suit. Only the gauntlets. Even then I didn't have any of the armor, so an attack from a three-pointer nearly broke them. Then I spent most of the test recovering from the attack. Luckily, Powerloader took a chance on me and enrolled me into the support department. With the sports festival, any student that does well can be transferred to the hero course. At least that's my plan. Hawks smirked and said, well, you gave me a good run, so you'll be running laps around those hero students. Izuku smiled and said, yeah, they won't know what hit them. Izuku paused and then asked, hey, is there any way we can stop by my mom's work and show her the suit? She'll be happy to see I got it working. Hawks sighed and shook his head. Kid, well, I'm glad for the excuse to relax on the train, but that is too much of a request for me. She'll just have to wait until the sports festival. Izuku gave a slow nod. He was in trouble with Principal Nezu in the HPSC, and he was lucky to have Hawks looking out for him, so he shouldn't be taking anything for granted. Besides, he could give her a call. So Izuku kept quiet until they reached the train station, where Hawks remembered Principal Nezu was going to reimburse him, so he brought 2 first-class tickets. Using the room to hide Izuku was an additional bonus. As the train wasn't going to arrive for another 30 minutes, the duo found a corner to wait in. Once the train arrived, Hawks began to present their ticket, though he didn't have to as the conductor began moving out of the way. Still, Hawks slipped the ticket into the man's hands and led Izuku into the train. They quickly walked to their compartment where Hawks quickly locked the door. As Izuku took off his jacket and hat, he said, that man seemed surprised to see me. I think he was more surprised I was taking a train. Hawks said as he looked through the windows and then sat down on one of the benches. Yeah, you don't seem the type, Izuku said as he took the other bench. After that, the room began to quiet and neither started a conversation until the horn blew and the train began moving forward. Hawks looked at Izuku, looking over the suit, and made a face at the shiny gold. You should think about a better color scheme. The gold made you too noticeable. Sure, that can be useful for civilians to see you and feel safe, but with everything gold, it can hurt to look at you on a sunny day. Izuku laughed and said, yeah, like a giant mirror reflecting the sun. Well, the gold color wasn't entirely by choice, but the suit is made out of a gold titanium alloy. It was just par for the course. Isn't that the same thing as satellites? Hawks said. Remember that information from a random trivia night. 13 had been the only one that got the question right. Though through her helmet, Hawks could tell she was quite pleased with herself. Yeah, I'm thinking about painting over it with a dark green thermal paint. Though maybe I should leave some gold accents, Izuku said, then looked down at himself. While wearing the suit wasn't uncomfortable, it made Izuku feel awkward. Imagine going to a Halloween party and you're the only one that decided to wear a costume. Sure, Hawks was wearing his hero costume, but it wasn't as eye-catching a suit that likes to be made of gold. With that, the compartment felt silent for half an hour, but eventually, Hawks got bored. He turned to Izuku and said, so let me get this right. Your name is Izuku Midoriya. You're a first-year support student at UA High School. Your father, Hisashi Sutaku, designed the armor you're currently wearing. Someone whose lab the HPSC has been looking for the last few years, but could never find. And you thought it was a good time to fly the suit into the upper atmosphere and faster than the speed of sound. There's room for additional weaponry, such as missiles. And I didn't know about the HPSC. After my father left, he didn't have much communication with my mother and I grew up thinking he had abandoned him. It wasn't until I was 13 that I learned he was dead and left the blueprints to the suit to me. So I didn't know the HPSC was interested in it. Izuku said, so how exactly does your suit fly? Hawks asked. Repulsor technology. Izuku showed his palms. One of my father's inventions, and a close-guarded one at that. The only form I could ever find was the blueprint he gave to me in one file in UAS servers. Hawks was unconfused. The HPSC was under the impression that it was Izuku's quirk that allowed him to fly and the suit was just protection, while the lights were support equipment helping Izuku direct his quirk. So your quirk doesn't help you with that? Izuku shook his head. Why did everyone think that? My quirk is static cell. My body generates a high amount of static electricity, however I have no natural way to discharge it. This sussed piece, Izuku pointed to his arc reactor, siphons my body's electricity and powers my suit. Any other power source won't be strong enough to power my suit for more than a few minutes. Cool. I bet there is a lot of stuff that happens in the suit, but I'm probably not going to understand how it works, so I'm not going to ask. However, I will ask, do you have any plans to transfer to the hero course? Hulk asked. Yes, I have a deal with the teachers that if I place well in the sports festival and pass the hero midterm exam, I'll be transferred. Izuku said. Some confidence appeared in his voice. Hawks had said earlier he had given the Pro Hawks a good chase. Well, if you get transferred after the sports festival, I'll look for you for an internship, Hawks said with a smirk. He wasn't much of a teacher, but he did owe a few favors to Hisashi. And with how sloppy Izuku's flying was, Hawks figured any advice would help. Really, Izuku said, his voice showing how excited he was at the prospect of getting to work under the number 3 hero. He would have to learn as much as he could. Yeah, you've grown a bit on me, kid. I like you. You remind me of a younger me. Well, slightly younger me. Free and feeling like you can take on the world with. Hawks paused as his phone went off. Hawks looked down at his pocket as his smile disappeared. That's the HSPC. I need to take it. Izuku nodded as Hawks pulled out his phone and answered the call. Yeah, it was Sutaku's design. The UA student confirmed it. Yeah, I said it was an UA student. First year in the support department, said Hisashi. Sutaku was his father and that is where he got the designs. I'm with him right now. Would he be available to talk with you? Hawks looked at Izuku. No, he doesn't not want to talk with you. Yes, he understands who you are, what he processes and what kind of trouble he is. We are traveling to UA so I can hand him back to Principal Nezu. No, I am not willing to bring the kid to you. He is under Principal Nezu's jurisdiction. Besides, it is simply a matter of getting lost. Typically the kid can swing the matter of illegal quirk use. Moreover, no one got hurt, nothing was damaged and nothing went horribly wrong. So no, he is neither a villain or a vigilante. Well, that's your standards, not mine. What did you just ask me? So you're telling me I have two options. Talk to the kid and convince him to come talk with you or beat the kid up and steal his armor. He has told me I would struggle to break open, and what if I chose to do neither? Be suspended for a year with no hero pay. Sounds like I would have a year of vacation. Good, you understand. I'm not bringing the kid to you. Oh, by the way, Principal Nezu said he was willing to talk this over with you. No, the kid will not be in the same room with you. Oh, empty head is a new one. Anything else you would like to call me by, besides my name? Oh good, you're finished. Then good night. Hawks hung up the phone, put it on silent, and then took out the battery. He was down the day and he wasn't going to be clocking off until he was back at his agency in his bed. That sounded like an interesting conversation, Izuku said as he hit a small chuckle. HSPC. Sometimes they act like I'm their dog on a leash. But don't worry about me. They really can't do anything to me. You, on the other hand, after your graduation expect some hardship. Because once you become a hero you'll no longer have Principal Nezu to protect you. Hawks warned. I'll remember that, Izuku said. After ordering dinner and enjoying their meal, the occupants of the compartment filled their evening with entertainment. Hawks pulled out his phone and slipped his goggles back on. However, he slipped the visor up like it was a pair of headphones. Then, showing extreme control over his quirk, Hawks laid down on the bench while Four Feathers came out and held his phone in the air, allowing it to hover above him without him having to use his hands. A skill his trainer always told him was useless growing up. But Hawks never listened. He always enjoyed having quote-unquote useless skills, as holding his phone helped him gain better control over precise movement. On the other side of the compartment, Izuku had slipped his helmet back and looked over all of the data from his flight, his speed and the temperature of his suit as he climbed through the atmosphere. What caught him off guard was how hot his suit had gotten, as he had barely felt any heat, but the sensors had recorded his exterior temperature as nearing 530 degrees Celsius. Guess the gold titanium alloy of his suit did more than keep out the cold, but it was clear that if he wanted to go any faster, he would have to deal with more air friction and increased temperature. That made getting thermal paint more of a pressing issue, though it was easy enough to get a standard batch. The internet was vast and anything could be found. So Izuku moved the data inside and began looking for thermal paint at different online stores. Most of what he was looking at could withstand the temperatures he was reaching. Yet he wasn't going full power, and if he wanted to travel at a higher speed, he would need to get better thermal paint. Maybe the Hatsumes knew a good supplier. If not, Izuku could ask some of his fellow support students, and maybe pass the request up to the second and third years. After checking a few last stores and not finding anything that fit his needs, Izuku powered off most of his suit and laid down on the bench. The bench creaked a bit as he distributed his weight over it. The eye slit closed and a white noise filled Izuku's ears. As he lay on the bench and sleep slowly overtook him, Izuku reflected on the day. A lot of different people had made different decisions, and some of those decisions raised questions in Izuku's mind of why they were made. Why was the HPSC after Project Hero suit? Why had Hisashi never asked him to be on the lookout? Why did Hawks want to help Izuku after finding out he was Hisashi's son? Yet these questions and more would need to be put on the back burner as he worked on getting ready for the sports festival. The repulsor in his right boot was going to be a simple fix, as Hawks only hit the core ring and that was easily swappable. Past that he would need to train. He knew how to fight, but it was a different feeling within the suit. As the sun disappeared over the ocean, Izuku fell asleep, making tomorrow become today that much quicker. Hawks looked at the sleeping Izuku, some sorrow feeling in his heart, as he recalled all the stress and worry that Hisashi carried with him every day. Izuku was young, barely even starting high school. He didn't deserve to have to deal with the HPSC breathing down his neck every day. As the morning of the next day arrived, the train rolled into Musutafu. Hawks woke up with a jolt as the train slowing down nearly threw him to the ground. He let out a yawn just as the sound of something heavy landing caught his attention. As he sat up, Hawks looked over and saw that Izuku had also slipped off the bench. Hawks gave out a small laugh as he fully sat up, then walked over to Izuku. He knelt and knocked on the helmet as if knocking on a door. "Anything broken in there?" Hawks said, and the faceplate popped open. "No." Izuku gave out a yawn and asked, "It's morning already. It feels like I just barely fell asleep." "Yes, a feeling that you'll become all too familiar if you get transferred to the hero course. You think you're burning calories now, but wait until hero training," Hawks said as he summoned back some of his feathers that had fallen off throughout the night. "Only if that's the problem," Izuku said as he sat up. Hawks noticed what appeared to be a green lightning zap against Izuku's eyes. The tiredness disappeared from Izuku's face as he pulled his helmet off, promptly forming a question in Hawks' mind that he stored to come back to later. As Izuku picked himself off the floor, he grabbed his jacket and hat. As the train rolled into the station, Izuku slipped in the jacket and covered his hair with the hat. After the train came to a full stop, Hawks opened the door and rushed the disguised suit out of the compartment. He hoped to beat the rush of passengers getting off the train, hopefully letting them escape without too much trouble. Izuku's heavy footsteps did nothing but bring attention to him, as Hawks was almost pushing him down the hallway and out of the train. Hawks slipped on his jacket and goggles. Izuku walked alongside him as they walked into the station, through baggage and out onto the street. There, Hawks finally stopped pushing Izuku, allowing him to look up and down the street. UA was in the distance, and with morning traffic starting soon, they would have to move to get ahead of it. "Should we call a taxi?" Izuku asked, and that would make a story that a taxi driver told to all his friends. "No, I don't think either of us is going to fit into the back of a taxi," Hawks said as he looked around. He saw people beginning to look at them, starting to recognize who he was and starting to pull out their phones. A sure sign they wanted a photo with him. And he was never one to turn down a photo, but he didn't have the time. "Besides, we don't have time to wait for one. People are starting to recognize me." "What, are we suggesting we fly?" "You're forgetting that's what got me into trouble the first time," Izuku said as he looked around, seeing people pulling their phones out. Hawks nodded his head a bit and said, "Yeah, true. But this time we should be close enough to UA." Hawks stretched out his wings and got ready to take a fly. "You should be good." Hawks then took a running start and then flew into the air, causing Izuku to smile. He quickly pulled off his hat and jacket, discarding them on the floor. As Izuku took off running, he slipped his helmet on. The moment the hut appeared, Izuku shot off into the sky, resulting in people quickly pulling out their phones in an attempt to get a photo, but Izuku was long gone before any of them opened their cameras. Izuku got above the surrounding buildings and took half of Hawks. Even with his broken repulsor, he quickly caught up to Hawks. Hawks noticed and gave out a chuckle, before doing a barrel roll, and then turned around and looked at Izuku, as if challenging him to do the same. Feeling a rush of adrenaline, Izuku tried to do a barrel roll, but as he nearly crashed into a building, he figured it would not be a good idea to try that again without more practice. Izuku heard Hawks laughing and saw him doing aerial tricks, but shooting off towards UA again. Izuku sighed and directed more of his quirk towards his boots and went rocketing after the winged hero. Within a few minutes, they landed at the front gate of UA and slowly hovered down to the ground. The land was soft and quiet, while Izuku dropped the last few centimeters, nearly breaking the cement under him. As Izuku caught his balance, he saw Powerloader and Mr. Aizawa walking up to greet them. Powerloader's expression was hidden by his helmet, while Mr. Aizawa had his usual neutral but annoyed look. "Mr. Aizawa," Izuku said as he slipped off his helmet, surprised to have the teacher of Wano waiting for him. He had seen the perpetually tired pro-hero in the hallways, and though they had never formally met, Izuku knew Mr. Aizawa would be the teacher he would need to impress in the end. Vlad King was also a hero course teacher, but he was over 1B and wasn't known as the teacher who expelled students to prove a point. Izuku was kind of hoping that their first meeting wouldn't be anything like this. "Yo, Eraserhead," Hawks said as he waved and smiled at the still half-asleep teacher. "Hello, Hawks. Midoriya," Mr. Aizawa said in a very monotone voice as he took a small sip of coffee, making up for the warmth that the pro-hero's voice lacked as he spoke Izuku's name. "I'm only here because I heard that the support student gunning for my class had got into trouble. If you were in my class when this happened, you would have been expelled before Hawks got to you." Mr. Aizawa stared death into Izuku's soul. Izuku felt like his best option was to try and fly away, but his suit kept his ground. Mr. Aizawa then sighed and walked away to do whatever he had planned for the day. "Don't mind him. He's always like that, even with all the naps he takes throughout the day." Powerloader said as he looked over his shoulder at Mr. Aizawa as he walked away. Powerloader then looked back at Izuku and smiled. So how did it go? Despite the situation and how much trouble Izuku could be in, Powerloader had a great interest in how well his best friend's design held up. He had been available for the maiden flight as he had to continue working on getting everything ready for the sports festival. Well, everything worked really well. I did a couple of laps around UAS main campus and then into the upper atmosphere, breaking the record for fixed-wing flight, and I think I broke the sound barrier twice, Jebisu chimed in. Yeah, but then I came back down and found myself in the middle of Fukuoka, Izuku said with a chuckle, as it had been a bizarre past day. Yeah, Principal Nezu called me after he finished talking to you. Speaking of the rodent, he's waiting for you in classroom 6G, Powerloader said, jabbing his thumb over his shoulder in the direction of the support department. Izuku nodded and began walking towards the support department, with Powerloader walking right behind him. Along with Hawks, for some reason, Powerloader noticed and turned to the number 3 hero and said, excuse me Hawks, but what are you doing? Principal Nezu said you would just be returning Midoriya back to UA. Hey, I said I would do that, but with my day now filled up, I thought I would take a look at Hisashi Sutaku's workshop. The HPSC has been interested in getting a look inside for a while. Their curiosity piqued my own. Hawks said, you don't plan on stealing anything, Powerloader said, knowing why the Hero Public Safety Commission was interested in Hisashi's work. But there was no need to get into that right now, right in front of Izuku. Won't even think about it. Hawks with his hands up in defense, but with a cheeky grin. The HSPC knew Sutaku had ties to UA, but they didn't think he actually worked at UA. If they learn, not only do I know where it is, but I've been inside, I'll be able to hold that over their heads for a while, Hawks said with a cheeky grin. Wait, you want to blackmail the HSPC? Izuku asked, looking over his shoulder with confusion at Hawks. And why would Hawks feel he would need to do that? Who do you think I learned it from? Hawks chuckled, ending that part of the conversation. Izuku and Powerloader moved the conversation to the data Izuku had gotten from his flight and made plans to go over it at a later date. After a short walk for two of the trio, they arrived at the support department and Powerloader scanned his ID. Once inside, Powerloader led the other two through the support department, to the back of the building where classroom 6G was waiting for them. Inside said room was waiting for Principal Nezu, enjoying a nice cup of tea. And one royal irritated, infuriated, aggrieved, vexed, tick-offed, fuming, wrathful, raged. Overall hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn-type anger, of one May Hatsume. After Izuku had left UA space, she had tried to track him with her quirk. But eventually, even that wasn't enough. May then tried to track Izuku's phone, but he was moving too fast and she received no update about Izuku or what he was doing. Until Principal Nezu had elected to inform her of the trouble Izuku had gotten into. After informing Powerloader, May was already angry from being thrown to the ground from Izuku's departure, so the news didn't do her any good. After May stormed away, with almost cartoonish smoke coming out of her ears and a look of vengeance on her face, Principal Nezu kept a close eye on her. Well, a close eye from his office, using the many cameras around UA. And what he had heard about her, he was not all surprised that she had taken her anger out by inventing, building late into the night until she collapsed from exhaustion. However, in the time she had spent inventing, she created nearly 40 different machines and each exploded. However, Principal Nezu didn't fail to notice that May did not once seem displeased at the surface-level failure. It was the opposite. After the first few explosions, she began to slowly gain a grin. Then she would clear her workspace and move on to the next invention. By the 15th explosion, May's grin was so large and evil-looking that Principal Nezu began to fear what she would do to her fellow classmate. So while others might call it a mistake, Principal Nezu invited May to wait with him. May arrived early in the morning, her devilish grin gone and replaced with a look of fury. And from that, Principal Nezu had never seen a support student so calm before. A staple of students from the support course was they were always working on something, drawing blueprints, working on homework or inventing. And May had been the worst in some time. But now she was acting the complete opposite. May sat perfectly still. Her fingers weren't tapping on the desk. Her eyes weren't moving around looking for something to entertain herself. No, she sat perfectly still as she looked across classroom 6G at the door. She looked like a predator motionless behind a bush waiting to pounce on its prey. And the moment it opened, Principal Nezu made no move to stop May Hatsume. When Izuku came into view, May made a beeline to him and began yelling while throwing her arms in the air. What a brilliant idea. Let's go up the stratosphere where you could have died from asphyxiation. Worse, you decided to come back down to Fukuoka. Were you trying to draw the attention of all the pro heroes in the area? You're lucky Hawks didn't kill you. Go get your armor off so I can hit you. Mei rammed her fingers against Izuku's arc reactor to get her point across. Izuku obeyed without a word as he walked over to the corner. After a few seconds, the wall panels retracted and mechanical arms came out and began to disassemble the armor. Once the last arm disappeared and the walls formed back together, Izuku turned around, only to see Mei walking up to him and quickly slugging him across the jaw. Now Izuku was the one that was stronger of the two, but that by no means didn't mean Mei was strong. She had an engineer's hands, meaning she could easily bend a piece of rebar without too much difficulty. So when Mei hit Izuku, he just collapsed and fell to the floor. "Oh, you didn't have to hit so strong," Izuku said, rubbing his jaw as a bruise was already starting to form. Izuku began to pick himself up and had his knee under him, but with all the training he had from pro heroes, his senses failed to see Mei's second attack. Mei had drawn back her legs and kicked Izuku in the ribs. Izuku fell to the ground with a surprised groan as he held a hand to his rib. "I'm going to hit even harder until you learn your lesson," Mei said then when a final kick made Izuku start coughing. Knowing she hadn't kicked strong enough to cause any serious damage, she waited for him to stop coughing and then offered her hand. And to the surprise of everyone else in the room, Izuku accepted it and Mei hauled him to his feet. Teacher, principal, and hero all watched with differing levels of concern and worry. "Now that is over, Midoriya. You are now on the HSPC watch list. If you make a mistake like that again, they will do anything to take your suit." Principal Nezu began as if nothing had just occurred. Principal Nezu, a power loader, was trying to stop him from going further. "They were interested in Project Hero suit long before your father died. They are one of the many reasons your father became paranoid in the later years of his life," Principal Nezu said. "Why is the HPSC so interested in my father's armor?" Izuku asked as he leaned on Mei as if she wasn't the one who just knocked the wind out of him. And as she had been the one to knock the wind out of him, it was her fault he couldn't stand properly. Principal Nezu turned on the holo table and pulled open Project Hero suit. As the hologram of the suit appeared, Power lay out her side and dropped his shoulder. No point in trying to stop Principal Nezu now. If Izuku was going to know the truth, he should know all of it. Your father feared the HPSC because they wanted to take his invention and militarize it. Your father made sure they never saw a working prototype, any piece of the armor. But now they have. They know the suit work, all of the parts of it, and they want it. Principal Nezu pointed at the suit. "This is one of the greatest inventions in the world since the atom bomb. Your father knew the power. It could change the way heroes are looked at. He always knew what could happen if it fell to the wrong hand. And I don't just mean villain. He protected it with his life, and as his son I hope you do the same." Principal Nezu took a deep breath. "For now, I will be meeting with the Hero Public Safety Commission after school. I request you two are off campus and at home. For now there is no need for you to get involved." "We understand." Izuku and Mei both bowed. Principal Nezu looked over Izuku and Mei. He might be able to hold those bloodthirsty government pigs for a bit, but eventually, they would come after Izuku and by proxy Mei. They would have to be trained on how to deal with them, as dealing with the HPSC was the complete opposite of fighting villains. Principal Nezu didn't show his disdain for the governmental body with a smile as he said, "Besides, you have to prepare yourself for the sports festival next week. I think I'll stay in town for that," Hawks said, staring through the hologram at Izuku. Hawks tried not to dwell on specific memories as he looked at Izuku. Yet Izuku looked so much like Hisashi, with the same hairstyle, the same genius intellect, and the same dumb smile Hisashi always wore when he got one of his new inventions to work. "Good. Now we'll leave you two alone," Principal Nezu said, as he and Power Loader began to walk out. "You have a lot to prepare. Shouldn't we be getting to class?" Izuku asked, following Principal Nezu and Power Loader. Izuku pulled out his phone and saw that school should have started 20 minutes ago, so shouldn't they be getting to class? Power Loader stopped and turned to Izuku. "All first years for the week off to prepare for the sports festival. Did you not know that?" Power Loader then realized that while he had brought up the sports festival in class, none of his students seemed too interested in it. As the support department while waiting until the school festival that happened in the fall, the sports festival was more catered towards the Hero Course students, meaning he had never explained they had the week off. Izuku and Mei looked at each other. Neither of them remembered that bit of information. "No," Izuku and Mei said. If they had the week off, they could spend the whole time working on inventions to use in the sports festival. Information Izuku knew as he asked Principal Nezu about, and he was kind enough to pass the information about it to Mei. Though the glint in her eye made Izuku worry about what she had planned. Principal Nezu turned to Izuku. "Then I suggest you use this time wisely. Have everything ready so the Hero Course student doesn't know what hit them." Advice that Izuku and Mei nodded to. Power Loader and Principal began walking out of the class again, but then the support teacher turned to Hawks and said, "Hawks, don't. You have somewhere to be." "No," Hawks said, having sat down in one of the classroom chairs. "I think I'll stay in here for a while." The HPSC is going to want me in the meeting and I didn't exactly get a good night's rest on the train. Powerloader looked at Hawks with a look that said, how in the world are you still a pro hero? Besides, I think Midoriya could use a few flying lessons. It was your first time, but you have a lot to learn. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Hawks looked over at Izuku, who had passed out and fallen to the floor. The overexcitement in his brain was too much. He was being offered to be trained by Hawks, the number 3 hero in Japan and one of the best air combat-based heroes in the world. Izuku would be able to mark something off his bucket list that he didn't realize he had put on it. Sure, he had trained with other pro heroes, even with Maruko, but those other pro heroes weren't as highly ranked and his training with Maruko was less than training and learning how to take a punch. Is he okay? Hawks asked, worried about all the physical abuse Izuku was receiving in such a short period of time. May unleashed some strong hit and falling unconscious to the ground couldn't have felt good on his head. Oh, good job. You crashed his strong drive, May said, looking over the unconscious Izuku. Give him a minute to reboot and he'll be fine. You should have seen him after Maruko agreed to train with him, all red-faced and unable to think. May looked at Hawks, not knowing what she had just said. Once Izuku woke back up, Hawks gave his offer again, which caused Izuku to immediately pass out again. Once Izuku woke up again and May did her best not to allow him to pass out again. He accepted Hawks' offer. With that, Hawks left the 2 students to work on their own. Time Izuku spent fixing his right boots until they were operational again. Once Izuku returned the boot to the wall, he allowed Jebisu to finally run the full diagnostic sweep. While this was going on, Izuku spent some more time searching for thermal paint, but when he couldn't find any that worked, he sent an email to Mrs. and Ms. Hatsume while posting anonymously to the UA support department chat. He wasn't expecting any kind of answer quickly, so he sent about working on preparing inventions to use in the sports festival. He had studied Class 1A school files and he watched them for a bit. Now it was time to use that knowledge to gain the advantage. When school would normally be let out, Izuku tried to sneak into Principal Nezu's office, but that plan was quickly discovered by Powerloader. Powerloader threatened that if he saw Izuku anywhere on the campus besides the support department or leaving, he would call Inko himself and get her to fly home. Knowing that would disrupt her work, Izuku left UAS campus and went home. On Tuesday, Izuku spent the morning looking over Jebisu's summary of the diagnostics, while working on the invention he would use to get the upper hand over Class 1A. After lunch, he switched his focus to working on the suit and fixing the problem he had run into during the flight. He knew he had felt his left leg dragging a bit and the scan showed the left leg had been properly attached and was out of alignment. Then came Wednesday with the first years having the week off to prepare for the sports festival. This had given the other class the week off. But that didn't mean they weren't working on side projects. The business department, having not made any plans to be in the festival, the students coordinated with businesses to sell their products during the festival. A few students from the support department could be found in their classroom working on inventions to show off, mostly during the first event as they weren't expecting to get past that. Among these students, May Hatsume was remaking some of the inventions she had made in Fury yesterday. After realizing that a few, despite blowing up, could help her in the festival if they were properly made, the general education students were taking the week off, enjoy the warming weather and enjoy their free time without having to stress about homework or school. That just left the 2 classes of the hero course, 1A and 1B, free to use the training gym to get in the last few days of training. Among these, there was one outlier, Izuku Midoriya. Wednesday morning, Izuku woke up early and headed to UA. After retrieving the wireframe gauntlets and boots along with the Neuroben from the helmet, headed to gym homage. As Izuku walked to gym homage, he began putting everything together. Everything should have been a mess of wires, but Izuku had gotten good at making wires look neat. He finished with the last screw, and with a twist the arc reactor activated. It began to buzz as electrical flowed through the wires and everything powered on. Once Izuku arrived at gym homage, he opened the doors and found Hawks waiting for him. Not as good as Ms. Kenken, but hey, it's chicken, Hawks said as he tossed the bare chicken wing into a trash bin. Then turned and saw Izuku walking into the gym. Looks like you were serious. I am. I have to put on a good show for the sports festival if I want to have a chance to be transferred into the hero course. And to do that, I have to show what my quirk and inventions are capable of. Everyone's been training with their quirk for a young age. I've only had a few months at best, Izuku said as he bowed to Hawks to show his respect to his new mentor. Well, at least you can admit when you need help, Hawks mumbled under his breath, then put on a smile. All right, first we're going to review how well you flew on Monday. You have a talent for it, but talent isn't much until it's refined into a skill. Where's you hear that? Izuku asked, not having expected to hear that from a person like Hawks, my old mentor, who got it from a fortune cookie. But that is beside the point. Talent is like a roll of a 20-sided die, and your success is more based on luck. When you practice your talent and it becomes a skill, the die can become a regular die until you can control the outcome of any roll. Makes sense, Hawks said as he hadn't understood his mentor's analogy the first time either. As Hawks looked at Izuku, he could see the gear turning in his mind. I think I do, Izuku finally responded. Alright, you already know how to fly. Well, hover, so we aren't going to be starting from square one. That makes my job easier and makes our schedule not so packed, meaning we can move up to a bit more advanced stuff, such as flying through rings, Hawks said as he looked up. Izuku followed the number 3 pro heroes, glazed upwards and saw that metal hoops had been hung from the ceiling around the room. This exercise to show your control over your speed and your reflexes. I will show you the path you have to follow. Once you are able to fly through the rings in a fast enough time, we will exchange them for smaller rings and change the route. What's the purpose of using the smaller hoops? Izuku asked as he pointed towards one of the smaller rings. Take it as this. What's the average width of a street in a major street? Hawks said, and Izuku shrugged his shoulders. If the road has a total of 4 lanes, it is usually 48 feet wide. Sounds like a lot. But when you try to turn in an intersection, suddenly that space will feel a lot smaller. So you would have 3 options. Completely stop in the intersection and turn yourself before shooting off. Or you can try to bank at a high speed and run right into the side of a building. Now with your armor, you could survive a crash like that. Hawks then saw the light in Izuku's eyes. No, don't run yourself through a building trying to maintain a high speed. The largest expense for any pro heroes, especially new ones, is property damage. Okay, Izuku said, but that's only 2. You said I would have 3 options. Izuku said as he thought about the first 2 options. The first result is allowing the villain more time to escape, while the second option had that and property damage on top. Hawks nodded. The third is what this exercise and experience will teach you. How to maintain good speed while turning without hitting anything. When I was chasing you through Fukuoka, it was obvious that you didn't know how to do this very well. You were afraid of running to a building, but you could have easily taken some corners much sharper and managed a faster speed. Though, Izuku said as his shoulder dropped a bit. He had gotten pretty good at hovering and moving in a vertical position, but hearing it from Hawks, a proficient flying, that he wasn't as good as he thought he was, it hurt a bit. Then again, that's why he had accepted Hawks' offer to help in his training. Since we only have a few days until the sports festival, you won't be able to make much progress in high-speed mobility and aerial combat. So let's shoot for the basics and you can continue to practice after the festival. Hawks aid, aerial combat, Izuku said, raising an eyebrow at that. He had repulsors and missiles. He could just handle any opponent from a distance without having to worry about getting close. In the past, aerial combat would have been referenced to fight jets, dogfight as the pilots would call it. They were ranged fights, but as pro heroes rose, the term broadened out to any fight that took place in the air. While many aerial heroes prefer to keep their range, myself included, there are some situations that would better be handled by getting in close. Hawks said, like you using your feather blade. Izuku questioned and Hawks nodded. But isn't the whole point of combat is to keep your opponent from hitting you while dealing damage to them? In a basic understanding, yes, but there is no clear-cut way to fight. Think about All Might. He had the most hits from villains, so just gets in close. But look at someone like Snipe. His quirk works at long range, so that's his preferred style. But he's still knowledgeable in close quarters in case the situation calls for it. Hawks said, then thought about it for a few seconds. Then he walked away from Izuku, stopping at 6 feet away, and then transformed one of his feathers into a blade. I want you to try and hit me with one of your energy attacks. Why? Izuku said, as he hesitantly lifted his right arm. To prove a point, Hawks said, secretly dropping another feather sword and sticking it in the ground. Izuku looked at Hawks, trying to figure out what the point of this all was, but couldn't figure it out. Whenever you want to. Izuku nodded and quickly raised his hand. Reading Izuku's thoughts, Chibisu directs energy from the arc reactor to Izuku's right hand, and within a split second the repulsor lets off an attack. Izuku knew his equipment was fast and his attack even more so, but he was surprised when Hawks managed to jump to the side and easily clear the attack. What surprised Izuku was when Hawks suddenly shot forwards and almost as quickly as his attack. Izuku felt a sharp edge lightly pressing against his throat. Now what would you do? A villain just dodged your attack and got in close. Your armor would help, but in the world of quirk, someone is going to get through. And what about their hostage? Hawks said. Izuku was confused about what the winged hero meant, but then he looked back to where Hawks was previously standing. Now in the place, actually a little behind it, was a burnt blade. Suddenly everything CLC'd in Izuku's mind. In the air, I can have 360-degree mobility, but so does a villain, meaning they can easily dodge a ranged attack and it can harm innocent bystander, Izuku said. Hawks nodded and removed the sword from Izuku's throat. And with how powerful your equipment is, a stray shot can do a lot of damage. That's why it is better sometimes to get in close to finish the fight. Against a grounded opponent, use your aerial advantage, but with experience, you'll learn when it's best to get in close, Hawks said as he reattached the feather to his wing. Now we've stalled for long enough, let's get to flying around. Izuku nodded and Hawks lifted himself into the air. Watch the path I create and then we'll see how well you can recreate it. Izuku nodded, wishing he had a camera so he could come back to Hawks' path and recreate it for later use. Hawks gave a thumbs up then shot forwards and began flying through the rings suspended from the ceiling. As Izuku watched, he directed some of his quirks electrical to his mind, and as a spark of green lightning jumped behind Izuku's eyes, the world slowed down. Now in doing this, the world didn't slow down from Izuku's point of view. Everything still appeared to be moving in real time, but his mind was able to process the information it received at a higher rate and with more clarity. This meant as Hawks flew around, Izuku noticed he would flap his wings extra strong before closing them up to easily fit through the rings. Moreover, whenever Hawks moved to turn, he would only slow down for a bit, before bending in the opposite wing of the direction he wanted to turn, while fully extending the other wing. As Izuku watched this, an image of a three-dimensional fulcrum appeared in his mind. Hawks' extended wing would slow that side of his body, while his close wing would speed the side up, making the tip of the extended wing act like a fulcrum and allowing him to pivot sharply on it. Still watching Hawks, Izuku thought about how he could do something similar. He didn't have big wings to catch air to slow him down, and his air brake won't be that effective. They did help, but not as nearly as Hawks' wings. And he couldn't simply stick his hand out to the side. His armor was built to be aerodynamic, and sticking out his arm would cause him to lose balance more than it would help turn him. Then again, Izuku didn't have to rely on air to create lift and to turn. His own equipment did that, and he had complete control over it, meaning he could lower and raise the power direction to each repulsor, meaning if he wanted to turn right, he could direct more power to the right side and vice versa. This would similarly speed up and slow down different parts of his body as Hawks did with his wings. Hawks finished flying through the last ring and then directed himself back to Izuku, softly landing on the ground without kicking up dust. "Think you can do that?" Izuku blinked a few times as his brain slowed down and his field of focus narrowed back to his normal range. "Yeah." Hawks smirked and gestured for Izuku to give it a try. Izuku engaged all 4 of his repulsors to 1% and took off into the sky. He hovered up to the height of the first rings before leaning forward and moving through it, and then quickly increasing to 3%, Izuku blasted off towards the next set of rings. The first 3 were mostly in a straight line. Izuku only had to weave a bit to the right and then back to the left to easily pass through the rings. Then came the first challenge. The 4th ring was barely 6 feet from the wall and the 5th ring was immediately to the right of it. Izuku could easily stop himself from hitting the wall by putting his hand out in front of him, but the point of the exercise was not to slow down and keep his speed up. So that's what Izuku did. As he came out of the 4th ring, he leaned as strong as he could to the right while Jabisu directed more power to the left repulsor, putting into practice what Izuku had seen from Hawks. Yet it didn't work as well as Izuku thought it would. He was able to take the turn at a good speed, but he wasn't able to turn sharp enough to stop himself from hitting the wall. His left foot nicked the wall, and the sudden change in momentum threw off Izuku's balance, enough that Izuku wasn't able to correct himself enough time, and he ran headfirst into the metal ring, letting out an exclamation of pain. Izuku killed all power to his repulsor and fell to the ground, landing on his butt. Izuku held a hand up to the welt that was already forming on his head. Hawks walked over to check on him, but he noticed a nasty glare from Izuku. "Smart idea, making the hoops metal. I can feel a headache already forming." "Well, you did good for your first go-around, though the point of it was to learn the path before trying to set a record. Wasn't expecting you to go all gun-ho and go as fast as you did." Hawks said. "Yeah, I hear that a lot from Mei," Izuku said as he rubbed his head, feeling the welt under his hair. While Mei could become hyper-focused on a project, it could take her some time to get her momentum. Izuku often found his momentum within minutes and nothing could stop him. "Take a small break. Then you can have another go at it," Hawks said, then walked over to a bench and sat down. Izuku continued to nurse his head, looking up at the rings, following the path Hawks had set with his eyes. If he wanted a chance to get into the hero course, it was an obstacle he needed to overcome. The hero student had 2 months on him, and if Bakugo was an indication, many of them had trained their quirks since they were kids. All the while Izuku had been left behind, in the belief he had a useless quirk. This was more than just a chance to show off his suit. It was a chance to prove that his quirk wasn't that useless, and he couldn't do that if he was making a fool of himself. With the panic from his head having mostly disappeared, Izuku stood up, brushed himself up and got back up into the air. He worked his way over to the first hoop and then hovered in front of it. It was barely his height, yet they were going to get smaller and smaller, a goal for Izuku to work together. With a serious expression on his face, Izuku shot forward and through the first ring, easily passing through the next 3, before reaching the point he had messed up. Izuku barely slowed down as he turned the corner, getting dangerously to the wall. but managed to get away from it. As he twirled around from the force of the G's, he managed to stop twirling as he passed through the 5th ring, but then he had to immediately drop down to get to the level 6th ring. Izuku managed to get through the 6th ring, but later Hawks told him that his ankles had nearly hit the inner edge of the rings. But that wasn't the hardest. The 7th ring was right behind the 6th, so to pass through Izuku would have to level it out. Yet he was going too fast and unable to handle the G-force and nearly crashed into the ground. As Izuku flew right above the ground, only a few inches from eating dirt, he stuck his hand out in front of him and angled them down. This allowed him to become vertical, and once he killed all power and dropped the foot to the ground. "You got a lot further that time," Hawks said, holding back a laugh. He was quite enjoying teaching someone, being able to use his experience and help others grow, a feeling he had not expected to feel divided by. "Yeah, but you were able to manage your speed through those hoops," Izuku said. "What do you mean?" Hawks asked. He knew Izuku had watched, but things could go unnoticed by an untrained eye. "When you dove down, you had your wings tucked in close and you didn't expand them out until you passed through the 7th ring," Izuku said as he wiped the dust off of his breath in front of his shirt. "Yes, I did, but my wings were angled to free fall. Then I opened them enough to catch air and glide through the rings. For that part I allowed gravity to momentarily take over," Hawks said. Izuku thought back to Hawks' flight. It looked as if he had been in control the entire time. Yet as Izuku thought about it, there were some moments when Hawks wasn't flapping his wings, but his speed hadn't dropped that much. He was effortlessly switch between flying and gliding. With that, Izuku took off into the air and began running the course again. Izuku knew he had to make it through, to also make it to the next step, to never give up, to see how far he could go and then go further. At the end of the day, through trial and error, Izuku was able to run the entire course effectively for 187 times straight, without messing up. In actuality, Izuku had flown through the rings a total of 2,580 times, as each time he messed up he would restart from the beginning and go through everything again. But as he would barely make any progress before messing up again, around the 1,100th runs, he switched up tactics. Instead of looking at the course as a whole, he broke it up into sections, with each section only holding 9 to 10 rings. Whenever he messed up a series of rings, Izuku would fly back to the start of the section, plus 1 or 2 rings. This allowed him to be a running start, before flying through the section again. Wherever he messed up, he would do this over and over until he was able to complete it 3 times without mistake. Once Izuku was able to do this with every section, he returned to the beginning and went for it. He still messed up on a few sections and would run it 2 or 3 times before going the full course again. Finally, around an hour before dinner, Izuku completed his last full run of the course. He cheered as he dropped down to the ground and raised his hands above his head. Within a day, he had gained a pretty good baseline of taking sharp turns and momentarily gliding. He had even had some practice in doing some more advanced aerial maneuvers, such as the barrel roll, which allowed him to easily move from side to side without slowing down. The Cobra instantly killed his momentum before redirecting himself upwards to a higher point. Izuku was happy to show that he already had a handle on it. He had the first half down, as he often used it to make sudden stops before lowering himself to the ground. Hawks had also formed the path to do a culbit loop, but placing 2 rings right above each other. Though Izuku had difficulty doing it correctly, and Hawks explained it was one of the maneuvers that put more G-forces on the body. Izuku also pointed out that either his hair got in his view or that his eyes became too watery to properly see. Hawks conceded with that and told Izuku that it would be fine if he only practiced the move with his helmet on. Izuku continued to cheer as he fell to his knees, happy with his success. His eyes were watery from all the wind that had been in them, but he was always crying from being happy. He hadn't felt this massive of a sense of accomplishment in a way. He had a goal and he was seeing progress towards reaching it. "Alright, Han Solo, you did your first run, but you haven't completed the castle run yet," Hawks said, as he hovered to Izuku and landed in front of him. Hawks was sure that Izuku wouldn't get his reference, but he was shocked when Izuku quitted back. "No, I'm going to need a hyperdrive for that," Izuku said as he stood up and caught a water bottle Hawks threw at him. He twisted off the cap and down the contain quickly. After wiping his mouth, he finished with, "I'm hungry and I have to cook for myself tonight." Hawks nodded and said, "I won't hold you any longer. Let's get your equipment back to G6. As they walked to classroom G6, Hawks explained some of the advanced aerial maneuvers, and though Izuku may not use all of them, it would be still good to have a sense of how to perform them. Walking to the front gate, Izuku waved goodbye to Hawks and then began to walk down the hill to the nearest bus station. As Izuku turned to look back, he saw Hawks posing in front of the evening sun before flying off, getting a good laugh from Izuku. At his apartment stop, Izuku got off the bus and headed up to the apartment. As soon as he walked in, he turned on the TV, which was on a new station. Though Suteen Co. has yet to release a statement, it has been more and more clear that something is amiss with their CEO and founder Mr. Suteen, as he had not appeared in public for some time, even missing his company's annual charity event. raising the question, has something happened to the man whose business has touched the lives of everyone in Japan? Izuku sighed, as it seemed the news was starting to figure out what was going on with that mess. He remembered the conversation he had heard from his mother. It was late at night and Izuku was supposed to be asleep when he heard Inko talking to the board of directors. Her stressed tone of voice was what caught his attention and made him listen. They were talking about whether it would be better to cancel the charity event or make a statement that Mr. Sutin was unwell and was unable to attend. Moving away from that, Izuku SWCH channels until he landed in the section of the channel that was always playing movies. After finding one that provided good background noise, an old American movie about an egotistical hotshot who learns he isn't the best at flying. After turning the volume up on the TV a bit, Izuku walked into the kitchen. He opened the fridge and began looking for food to use to make himself some dinner. The next day, Izuku arrived a little late to UA, having stayed up a little late on a project for the sports festival. Even without all the stalking he had done, he knew 1A and 1B would be difficult obstacles to get over. Class 1B had Setsuna Takego and Huryu Rin from recommendation, and along with them, Izuku had kept a close eye on Yosuo Uwais and Kanoko Komori. From watching them train their quirks at school, Izuku knew that with his wheeled quirk, Uwais could easily trap Izuku in his suit and render him immobile, and Komori could make mushrooms grow inside his suit, messing up all the wiring. But then there was Class 1A. Every student there had earned their place in that class, but like Class 1B, there were some students that Izuku kept a closer eye on. Momo Yaoyorozu and Shoto Todoroki were the other pair of recommended students, the son of the number 2 hero and a girl who could make anything almost instantly. Izuku feared her power a bit. What if Momo saw his suit blueprints? Could she instantly make her own version, and who's to say his version would be better? Then Katsuki Bakugo, his old childhood associate. His explosions could potentially damage his suit, a theory Izuku hadn't gotten a chance to test, nor did he really want to. Lower on the list was Mina Ashido. With her quirk, Acid, there was no telling what kind of damage she could do to his suit. Then in fourth was Ochako Uraraka, and she interested Izuku a bit. Her school file had her quirk listed as 0 gravity, yet that wasn't what Izuku feared about her. He already had aerial mobility, so losing his gravitational pull wouldn't affect him that much, not unless Ochako could increase gravity, but she never showed the ability to. No, what he feared about Ochako was her second quirk. It reminded Izuku a bit of All Might, a lot in fact. The pink glow she got around her body, and how she gained super strength and enhanced speed. Yet she only seemed to practice her secondary quirk with Gaizan Hisahito. Speaking of Gaizan Hisahito, he was at the top of Izuku's list, not out of fear or respect, but for his raw strength and tactical mind. During training, sometimes Gaizan moved so effortlessly that it seemed he had already gone through UAS hero course before, and he was able to handle any kind of situation thrown at him with a calm and collected mind. And worse, it seemed he had it all with his quirk: super strength, super speed, endurance, regenerative property, and worse, it seemed like no attack could hurt him. How was anyone supposed to defeat a person who couldn't take damage? Izuku shook his head from that as he walked through UAS gate. Though the first years had the week off, Izuku was late to his training with Hawks, so Izuku quickly took off towards the support department to get his equipment. Arriving at the building, Izuku scanned his student ID and then began running through the hallway. His shoe squeaked across the freshly cleaned floor, catching the attention of Power Loader, who looked up from his coffee to see Izuku breeze past him. Power Loader began to scold Izuku, but by the time Power Loader fully turned around, it was just in time to see his student disappear around a corner. Sliding across the floor to slow down, Izuku arrived at classroom 6G. He pressed his hand against the door to scan it, and the door quickly opened. Running inside, Izuku grabbed his gauntlets and boots from the holo table and a wrench, then ran out. As he ran out of the support department building, Izuku slipped on his gauntlets, using the wrench to tighten the screws as he shoulder-checkered the door. Outside, Izuku continued to run until his gauntlets were fully assembled, and then he fell to the floor and put on his boot. Once all the wires were tightened, Izuku connected all the wires to the arc reactor. Once he heard the familiar sound of his equipment powered up, Izuku quickly blasted off to Gym Omega. As he flew to Gym Omega, he blew past Principal Nezu, nearly making the little rodent spill his tea. Izuku hit the ground and slid to a stop, then turned and looked back at Principal Nezu. With tea spilt over his vest, Principal Nezu looked at Izuku with a neutral face. But to Izuku that was scarier than angry. There was a level where Power Loader got angry at Mei for blowing the lab up because she disregarded safety. And then there was the level Principal Nezu was showing. Mr. Sutaku Izuku knew he was dead. Most people just called him Midoriya as that's what he went by. But since Inko and Hayashi had never officially divorced, Izuku's legal name was still Sutaku. You are only permitted to use your equipment within the support department or one of UAS gyms. They are not to be used for transportation when you are late to class, Principal Nezu said, making sure that Izuku heard every word. Now get to your training. Izuku gave a nervous smile as he began running away. reigniting his equipment once he was out of range. Izuku lowered his speed a bit so he had better control over his path, but was still moving at a good speed to get to Gym Gamma. As he neared the door, Izuku accidentally killed all power to his equipment, causing him to drop to the ground and roll, which resulted in him rolling through the door and comically ending as he rolled onto his butt and stopped. Oh man, I wish I had my phone ready to record that. I bet that would even get a smile out of Eraserhead. Hawks called out, hovering in the air as he looked down at Izuku. Glad my panic and anxiety can give you a good laugh, Izuku said as he sat on the floor for a bit before picking himself up. He spent the next few minutes brushing all the dust and dirt off of him. So what's the plan for today? Izuku then shook his head, and a loud dust cloud appeared above him that was big enough to conceal his entire body. This almost got another laugh from Hawks, but he was able to keep his composure. Hawks held a hand up to his mouth and coughed into it. First off, we're going to be in the air all day. You'll only be able to land when we take a break, so get up here with me. Izuku nodded and engaged his equipment and rose up until he was level with Hawks. Well, if nothing else, this will be a good test to see how long my equipment can last. That and my quirk. Yeah, sure, try to keep that optimistic view on this, Hawks said, waving his hand in a dismissive gesture. Yesterday you got a good baseline of your level of mobility. Now today we'll see how well you can fight in the air. Well, I've had training before, but not in the air, Izuku said as he thought about it. Oh, and who thought it would be a good waste of their time training you? Hawks asked. His voice was dripping with sarcasm. Crimson Dynamo and Captain Japan, Izuku said, as he waved his arm around a bit as he leaned forward a bit too forward. Hawks laughed, then Izuku said, and Mirko trained me for 2 days. Hawks immediately shut up at the comment. He looked at Izuku to see if he was lying. It was clear he wasn't. Hawks had run into the number 5 hero before, and it was clear why she was number 5 in Japan. She was stubborn and strong-headed, and she never gave up. And if she trained Izuku, Hawks was a little afraid that he had underestimated the kid in front of him. I did stay most of those 2 days on my back, but hey, it was fun nonetheless, Izuku said. Hawks screamed in his head. Izuku had trained with Mirko for 2 days. Nothing someone would imagine as fun. Mirko was known to be ruthless in the way she fought, a step beyond dirty. She is a pride warrior too, so if Izuku never surrendered and kept on getting back on his feet, something Mirko would only see as him asking for more. Hawks could only imagine Mirko kept her cool for so long. All the Izuku saw that training as fun. Stupid, crazy, resilient, or blissful. Hawks couldn't decide which one Izuku was, probably all of them. I thought he would probably be coming back a lot during the next week or so. For now, he had to table it and teach Izuku how to survive a fight. Then again, if he survived what Mirko considered training, he could probably survive anything. Shut up, Hawks yelled in his mind, then focused on Izuku. All right, we're going to similar training as yesterday. While we can talk about aerial combat, you best learn by practice. For now, we'll begin with dodging. Hawks gave a sinister smile as he transformed one of his feathers into a blade and held it out ready to use. Hawks saw Izuku's visible swallow, before nodding and getting a serious face. Izuku knew he could use his quirk to enhance his cognitive ability, but it was going to be a long day and Izuku didn't want to tire himself out too quickly. Besides, Izuku had spent his childhood and early teenage years dodging attacks. How wrong could it be in that? Izuku's mind refocused as he saw Hawks' SWNGNG his weapon. Izuku tried to take a few steps back, but his feet just waved back and forth through the air, keeping him in the same spot. As that didn't work, Izuku held his arms down in front of him in an X formation to block, but that stopped his arm from keeping him up in the air. So while this results in Izuku successfully dodging the attack, it occurred by him falling backwards and down. Izuku nearly hit the ground before he realized what was happening. He quickly shot his arm out, increasing the power directed to his gauntlets. This stopped his descent by backflipping back into the air, further away from Hawks. Well, I would say that works, but we both know that isn't the truth, Hawks said as he watched Izuku regain his balance, as that wasn't what you meant to do. You haven't not much experience fighting the air, let alone dodging an attack. You tried to take a step back, but that's not going to work in the air, as you have nothing to push against except for the air around you. That's your personal challenge for becoming a hero. While everyone else learns how to fight on the ground, you have to learn how to also fight in the air. Otherwise, you limit yourselves in what you can do as a hero. Izuku nodded as he regained his balance and slowly hovered back over to Hawks. While on the ground, you move your legs to dodge. Up in the air, it's a bit different. Personally, I have to rely on my wings. But with you, you're still using the same area of your body but in a different way. It's like you grew up playing a game one way, but then you learn you've been doing it wrong your entire life. You'll have to break old habits and make new ones. Instead of moving your muscles, you'll just need to focus on them. And that only comes with practice, Hawks said, reading his weapon and lounged towards Izuku. Izuku panicked but managed to stay in control enough to keep his legs from moving. He held his arm out in front of him. However, instead of simply increasing the power to his gauntlet, Izuku let loose an energy attack. So while the concussive force went forward, Newton's third law sent Izuku backwards. This effectively made him dodge the lunge while deferring Hawks from moving forward, making him spread his wings out to stop himself. A good try, but like last time it was more of a happy accident than anything else, Hawks said as he batted his wing and flew back a bit. Izuku thought about lying and saying he meant to do that, but then he dropped his head and gave a small nod. Seemed today was going to be longer than yesterday, and yesterday already felt long. Mei was taking a bite from her sandwich from the lunch made by her mother and forced to take by her inner Izuku Midoriya. As she looked at the computer screen in front of her, it would typically be showing off data from one of her inventions, or be filled with notifications of stuff she had forgotten to do or simply ignored. But now it was showing off something new as she swallowed the bite of a sandwich from her water bottle and looked back at the computer screen. The first thing she did when she got to UA was hack into the security system, not an easy task. And now Mei normally would have one of the cameras of Jim Gamma in the corner of the screen. But since she was taking a lunch break, she had made it full screen so it was the only thing she could focus on. This was the first time she wasn't able to watch Izuku train and work on his equipment. And that was one of the few things Mei could easily focus on besides inventing without becoming distracted. While other people listened to music, talked to a friend, or had a movie on in the background while they did stuff, Mei watched Izuku work on his equipment. It kept her attention and allowed her mind to actually subconsciously work on projects. But now Mei and Izuku were working to get ready for the sports festival. Mei felt her mind jump back and forth behind different projects. Yesterday she had barely made any progress on anything, but since she had a small window to Izuku, she felt driven. But watching Izuku as he trained with Hawks, Mei felt it was more of a hindrance than expected. "Hey Hatsume," Power Loader called from behind Mei. Mei quickly panicked as her teacher was about to see that she had hacked into UAS security without permission and was not focusing on her project. She grabbed her mouse and moved it to close the window, but Power Loader grabbed her hand and stopped her from CLCing the button. "I see that you've been trying to break into UAS security system again. Last time Principal Nezu warned you about that." "Sorry," Mei said, though she wasn't. If UA didn't want their system hacked by a 15-year-old, then they needed better security. "What were you trying to get access to?" Power Loader paused as he looked at the screen and watched Izuku try to dodge Hawk, but swiftly got nailed in the side from the blunt side of Hawk's sword. "Cameras, and you're watching Midoriya. You know stalkers start out by watching their victims from a distance." "It's not like that," Mei said, trying to close the window, but Power Loader held her finger back before pulling her hand away from the mouse. "I'm not stalking Midoriya." She got a small blush on her cheek as her mind told her that she was lying to herself. "Yet you hacked a multi-million yen security system, risked your enrollment in Japan's top hero school, and tried to close it so I couldn't find you watching your classmates. A classmate that is trying to get into the hero course. I think that's considered stalking," Power Loader said. "Please don't tell Izuku," Mei said, and Power Loader caught on to the fact Mei called Izuku by his first name. "I'm not into dramas like Midnight, but is there a reason you're watching Midoriya?" Power Loader asked. While he wasn't Midnight, it was still his duty as a teacher to look out for his students, and he has grown close to Izuku in the few weeks since school had started. Mei whined a bit as she tried to reach for the mouse again, but Power Loader quickly FLC-curred it out of her reach. She closed her eyes and looked down, whining as she shook her head. She didn't want to, couldn't say anything that wouldn't dig her grave deeper. "Hatsume, why are you watching Midoriya?" Power Loader asked, and Mei shook her head. Power Loader was going to ask again with more force in his voice, but then Mei answered. "I'm proud of what he's doing," Mei yelled out loud, eternally grateful that she had her own space to work and the other student of the support department didn't hear her. "With how Izuku is going, he'll be the first student from the support course to be transferred into the hero course." "You sound proud but disappointed," Power Loader said, as he pulled out a chair and sat across from Mei. Mei wasn't working on an invention, something that was rare to see in the support department. Even outside of the support department, she was always trying to work on some project. So whatever was going on was big enough to pull her away from that. He's doing so much to fulfill his dream, to prove to the world he can be a hero. And he's doing it so quickly, Mei said, as she looked at Izuku fly around but then focused back on Power Loader. Power Loader was going to say something that Izuku had helped but stopped himself. He took a moment to look at it from Mei's perspective. She, the daughter of two of the world's best engineers, had been engineering since she could first walk. Got in trouble for taking things apart around the house and putting them back together, usually not the correct way. Mei had been working on her hover boots since she was a kid. Power Loader knew this as he had got a glimpse of some of her old blueprints. The dates had them made when she was 9 and she had worked tirelessly to get to her level of skill and knowledge. Yet then came along Izuku Midoriya, who probably had the skill of an engineer of taking apart pens and putting them back together. Then he had met Mei and her parents and within a few years had caught up to Mei's level of engineering. who had taken years to do so, and then quickly surpassed her and was doing engineering of equipment she could never have dreamed of. Mei probably felt she was being overshadowed by Izuku, and by watching him train, she could always tell how far behind she was and use it to try and best herself and her inventions. Hatsume Midoriya is a smart kid, and he had some good teachers and a good friend to push him to where he is today. But just as there are different types of heroes, there are different types of engineers, and I'm sure Midoriya will always look towards you for help, Power Loader said. What? Mei asked, looking at her teacher. Why was he saying that? Sure, Mei was a little jealous of Izuku's equipment, but she knew that they were Hisashi's inventions. I'm saying that you and Midoriya are two different types of engineering, Power Loader said, caught off guard by Mei's sudden lack of response. What? No, I'm not disappointed over that. Yeah, it's a little unfair that quickly Midoriya has progressed, but I'm glad he's doing what he loves, Mei said, then gestured back to the camera, as it showed Izuku accidentally ramming his back into the wall. I just wish that what he loves to do won't take him away from me. What do you mean? Power Loader said, confused about how the issue was different from what he was expecting. Since we learned about Classroom G6, even before that, Izuku has been working towards one goal, getting transferred to the hero course, and we both know that Izuku is going to get in. Hawks are training him for Pete's sake. A top 10 hero won't waste their time on a support student unless they saw potential. And since Izuku has wanted to be a hero since he was a kid, he's going to work harder than anyone else to prove himself. So when he gets transferred, I'll lose him. He'll have whatever new class he gets into to spend time with, and he won't have time to come back to the support department and see me, spend time with me. Mei then let out a deep sigh. I'm afraid I'll lose him. Power Loader looked at Mei with an acknowledging look on his face, but then it broke and he chuckled a bit. Mei raised her arm to hit Power Loader in the shoulder as she would have with Izuku, but stopped when Power Loader answered why he was laughing. You're afraid that you're going to lose him, soon to be Mr. Super Famous Support Course student. You think that once he becomes a hero, he'll no longer have time for you, that he won't make time for you, that he won't need you anymore. But I'm telling you, he'll come back to the support department. It is where his suit is stored. That's just it. I don't want Mr. Super Famous Support Course student, Izuku Midoriya, the first support student in history to become a hero. I just want my Izuku Midoriya. The nerd geeks out whenever he meets a new pro hero and asks for their autograph in his notebook that he always seems to have on him, Mei said, looking down at the ground. So what do you want him to do? Put your name on the side of his suit, your parents' company logo. Have Hatsume Industries be a sponsor of Iron Man, Power Loader said in a small joking tone of voice. Then Mei shook her head. Power Loader sighed and put a hand on Mei's shoulder. You aren't going to lose that Midoriya, the nerd that wants every hero's signature, or the one you met in the junkyard that day. Mei looked at Power Loader, confused about how he knew about that. Mei and Izuku had agreed never to discuss that day ever again. It was water under the bridge, more out of embarrassment than bad BLD. Your mom and Izuku's mother told me about that. But I'm telling you, he'll come back to you, he'll always will. He'll continue to come back to the support department, and when the time comes he'll look to you for assistance. Eventually, he'll run into a problem that he can't solve by himself, and I bet you'll be the first person he turns to for help. He'll be the same Izuku Midoriya from when you first met him, just in a new environment. But the new environment is what I'm afraid of. Spotlights will be on him as he joins 1A. He'll be in 1A, and he'll have to focus on becoming a hero, spending time with his new friends to learn from them. I'm afraid I'll fade from his mind, Mei said. I can promise you won't. You're the first friend he ever made. He isn't going to leave you behind, Power Loader said. Then looked Mei in the eyes as she glanced back at her monitor. You've done a lot in preparation for the sports festival. Why don't you take a break tomorrow and watch Midoriya train with Hawks? Get your mind off of inventing. Mei looked at Power Loader and smiled at the suggestion. She always told herself that inventing was her #1 priority, at least until she met Izuku. So if there was anything that could distract her, it would be him. Maybe she would get to see him fall flat on his face like he did during his training with Mirko. Mei smiled as she remembered how she burned those images into her mind. I will, Mei said. Her mind was now focused and she could think clearly. Tomorrow she would take a break, watch Izuku humiliate himself in some way, and have a good laugh within him. But for now, she had found her motivation again, and it was time to put it to work. Mei closed the camera from her monitor. It would now just be a distraction, making her come back to a worry that she had faced and overcome. For now, she needed focus, and Izuku was the one thing to draw her away from inventing. Izuku was sore, to say the least, having spent the day dodging different attacks from Hawk. Izuku was more sore than tired or exhausted. He had gotten a good handle on flying around yesterday, but today was more of a challenge for him as he couldn't figure out how to effectively dodge, thus resulting in him repeatedly hitting the ceiling, running into walls, and nearly landing on his butt on the ground. Throughout the day, he guessed breaking old habits and all the good kind of rot was going to be harder than he initially thought. However, in the end it really didn't mean anything at the moment, as Izuku just wanted to relax. And to help that, he was carrying 2 bags of ice upstairs into the bathroom, where an already half-filled bathtub was waiting for him. This wasn't his first ice bath, but it was going to be the most torturous one yet. His back, legs, shoulders, head, his entire body was screaming out in pain as he lifted the first ice bag upon the edge of the tub. He pulled out a box cutter, not wanting to strain his body even more to tear a hole, and he pushed the blade out, then used to cut along the top of the bag. With a hole now in the bag, Izuku titled the bag and the ice within poured into the bathtub. Once the first bag was empty, Izuku grabbed the second bag, cut it, and then poured it into the tub. He listened as the ice crashed against each other and bobbed around in the water. He was not looking forward to it, but knew it would help his muscles to relax, and it would make the hot bath after the sports festival all that much sweeter. Once the last bag was empty, Izuku tossed them aside, making a mental reminder to deal with them later that he would completely forget about. He then pulled off his clothes and slipped into the bathtub, his body rejecting the cold and wanting to get out, but Izuku forced his body in by falling in. Luckily, no water slapped over, and Izuku let out a small short breath as his teeth clattered a bit. His body tried to fight against the cold water, but with no easy way of insulting body heat, Izuku's core temperature rapidly decreased. With a small exhaust, Izuku lowered his head against the back of the tub so the water rose up to his neckline. His body began to slowly relax, and he was able to enjoy the feeling of the water surrounding his body. Then the green sparks happened. They were small and jumped from his chest to different muscles and re-entered his body. Normally this wasn't an issue for Izuku, as he could stop his quirk from leaking out in the highly conductive water. Yet in the past, after long days of exercise and inventing, Izuku found when his muscles were sore and if he let his quirk's electricity run free, it would target his muscles, sort of acting like electrotherapy, using the water to travel and helping them relax. So as flashes of green appeared behind the ice, Izuku felt his body relax even more and was able to enjoy himself despite the cold. Izuku stayed in the ice bath until all the ice had melted, and then he got out and pulled the plug in the tub. While the water drained, Izuku dried himself off with a towel and then wrapped it around his waist. He walked down the small hallway of the apartment and into his room, where on his bed waiting for him was a pair of sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt. Izuku slipped into the clothes, feeling his body slowly start to warm up with the insulation. He then fell onto his bed, face first into the pillow, and would have drifted off to sleep had it not been for his phone going off with a notification. Well, 2 at the same time, which caught his attention as one was the ringtone for May and the other one was Inko. Izuku reached over and grabbed his phone from his nightstand and opened the text from May first. "I'm going to watch you train tomorrow." Izuku cut his head a bit at this. He flipped himself over and sat up against the bed frame to make sure he was reading it correctly. "I'm going to watch you train tomorrow." He read correctly the first time, and it wasn't a question or a simple statement. May was saying she was going to watch him train tomorrow, and there was no way he was going to stop her. Not that Izuku wanted to stop her. Hawk's training had left with little time and energy to do personal stuff, and Izuku was more than happy to see May again. From Inko was a more interesting text. "Hey Izuku, work has been hectic. The media has been asking more questions about Mr. Soutine and the board still hasn't decided how to handle the issue. I'm sorry I haven't been able to be home for a while, but I hope you understand why." Also, it took a bit for the text to load, telling Izuku it wasn't a simple text. After a few seconds, a link appeared to a news article talking about hawks being spotted chasing and then talking to a metal flying object. Izuku gave a small chuckle as he opened the link and then speed read through the articles. No mentions of armor or anything of the sort, and no one was able to get a clear photo of him. Izuku guessed the gold of his armor causes too much of a lens flash for that to be possible. SWCH back to texts. Izuku sent a reply. "Yes, that was me. Nothing gets past the media, but I guess you already know that. I got the suit working and wanted to take it for a test flight. Got lost over Fukuoka. Wanted to stop by your work, but Hawks found me first. Oh Izuku, why didn't you tell me about that?" Inko immediately sent back. "Because you already have so much to worry about. I didn't want to put any more on your plate. And in the end nothing really bad happened. I got a stern talking to from Powerloader and Principal Nezu. Afterwards Hawks offered to train me for the sports festival." Izuku could hear his mom starting to hit her forehead against whatever desk she was sitting, grinding her teeth and yelling about how he was the cause of all her graying hair, and that he would be the death of her, something Izuku didn't want her to do. Izuku then could hear the sigh Inko released before sending the next text through. "You accepted the offer, didn't you?" "Of course not. I only would accept training from All Might." "Of course I did. Who do you take me for, or does my All Might collection not scream how obsessed I'm with pro heroes?" Hatsume told me that I passed out the first 2 times Hawks offered. "Mom, the day I don't accept training or an autograph from a pro hero is the day I've turned evil or been SWCH with an alien." "Okay, fair enough. It was dumb question to ask." I'm just glad that you're moving so quickly in your studies and glad that nothing bad has happened to you. So how prepared are you for the sports festival? Inko sent in quick succession. Very. I think I even have a shot at getting noticed. Maybe even my name called out by the announcements. Are you going full suit or waiting? I'm going to wait. The first 2 events are always something random, but the third is also a one-on-one rounds tournament style. Izuku said he didn't want to reveal all of his tricks early on. His best weapon was going to be the element of surprise. Did you get all your equipment checked and signed in? I would hate for you to be disqualified for unregistered equipment. I did that Tuesday. Surprisingly, it was Hatsume that reminded me. So will you be able to make it? Izuku asked and held his phone against his chest. They had been a team since Hisashi had died and had been there for each other. This was the first time they had been apart for an extended period of time. And that was part of the reason Izuku had dove some heavily into his schoolwork and working on Project Hero Suit. It was a few minutes before Izuku's phone chimed again. When it did, he lifted it and saw the first word of the text, sorry. Izuku sighed as he signed into his phone to look over the rest of the text. Sorry, but I don't see my schedule clearing up anytime soon. I'm sorry, sweetie, but I only have one meeting on Monday. It's with the board and I can't miss it. But I promise to have my phone tuned to the present mic's highlights. Inko's text had a few smiley faces at the end. Aren't the board of directors going to be mad that you're listening in and might cheer if I do well? Izuku sent it with a smile on his face. He had a small picture of Inko suddenly jumping out of her chair cheering for him when he won. Then giving an extremely smug I do what I know face to the board of directors. Are you promising to do something worthy of the highlights? Inko sent and Izuku chuckled. You know us Midoriyas. Watch out for us or we'll knock your socks off, Izuku said as he laughed. It had been a while since Izuku was able to have this kind of conversation with his mom, where they talked about their worries but in a joking manner from an outside perspective. He just wished Inko would be there to watch it in person. Even if she had to leave right afterwards, it would still be nice to see her again. Just remember, I'll be cheering for you in spirit. Always, as I have always done and will do, Inko said, then looked at her phone waiting for her son's text. She had sent her initial text in a small hope of a distraction from her work, as despite it being past the time she was supposed to be clocked off, she had some personal work to do. After a few seconds of the 3 dots appearing, Izuku's text came through. I love you, Mom. Thanks for always being there for me. Good night. Inko sighed. Her little hero was safe and sound. Good night, Izuku, Inko said, then turned off her phone. She slipped it into her pocket. She had been distracted long enough, and now was time to turn her attention to figuring out what had happened to cause Mr. Soutine to disappear. While the board of directors tried to give the impression they were looking into his disappearance, Inko had seen firsthand how much those were lies. Whenever Inko brought it up in her meetings with them, they gave the same answer and shot her down. After being lied to so many times, Inko had decided to take it upon herself to get her answer. She typed a few keys on her computer and the monitor turned black before reappearing as a dim white screen. Inko pulled open one of the drawers under her desk and pulled out a pair of glasses. As Inko slipped on the glasses, the computer monitor came back into view and on it was a Sushin Co. server. Inko sighed. It had taken a bit to get into Mr. Sushin's private hidden server, his secret way to have a look around his company's work without being detected. It wasn't all that dissimilar to how Hisashi's paranoia showed itself years leading up to his death. However, what had truly caught Inko's interest was the fact that she had to get a surprise pair of glasses from Mr. Sushin's office to view it. She guessed that she had caught him wearing these glasses a few times, whenever she came to his office to drop off some documents. She was so close to a mystery, and looking back now she should have paid better attention. Yet at the time Inko didn't think of it that much. Perhaps they were just blue light glasses, to help from staring at a screen all day, as she owned a pair of such glasses and used them on occasion. It wasn't until Inko found her way into Mr. Soutine's private server, and after running out of theories, that she thought back to the glasses. Mr. Stein's vision might have been 20/20, but clearly his foresight wasn't. With a close ear to her office door and with a quiet breath, Inko grabbed the mouse and continued looking over communications between her boss and someone by the name of Dr. Izuku woke up even more tired than when he had fallen asleep. It was Friday, 3 days before the sports festival, and he had one more day of training with Hawks, as Saturday and Sunday were left to him to make final checks with his suit. Izuku looked at the phone in his hand, that he had fallen asleep holding. The clock read 7:05. He had an hour and 25 minutes until he had to meet Hawks at Gym Jima. Izuku wished he could fall back asleep, but he was the kind of person who once he was awake in the morning couldn't fall back asleep. So with a defeated sigh, Izuku rolled out of bed and hit the floor. With a small groan, Izuku got to his feet and took a small step to the door. His legs gave out and he landed on his butt. Apparently yesterday had taken more out of him than he figured. Izuku reached up to his nightstand and pulled open the drawer. After reaching inside and blindly feeling around, he pulled out a small multimeter the Hatsume had modified to more accurately read his quirk. 500 million volts. Izuku's eyebrows rose as the multimeter told him he was only producing half a gigajoule per second while his usual was 50. Yesterday had taken a lot of him. Maybe he should tell Hawks that he needed to take a break from training and get back on Sare. Izuku shook his head. He needed to train and needed to catch up to his opponent if he wanted a chance to show the world he belonged in the hero course. Setting the multimeter back in the drawer, Izuku reached in further and pulled out a taser, gripping the two metal prongs in his left hand. Izuku pressed the button down on the trigger. Immediately, electricity from the taser jumped into his body and recharged his quirk. After a full minute of the taser feeding Izuku electricity, it sputtered out and died. Izuku would need to recharge the battery. Izuku sighed. He needed to find a better way to quickly recharge his quirk. While his arc reactor could siphon off his quirk's electricity and feed directly to his suit, without a constant flow of electricity, the arc reactor could only hold a charge for 10 minutes. Not that useful when an unpredictable recharge was needed. Izuku threw the taser back into the drawer and closed it. It was time to get ready for the day. Izuku got out of his sweatpants and shirt and got dressed in a pair of jeans and a black t-shirt. After grabbing a pair of socks, his wallet and his phone, Izuku headed downstairs to make himself breakfast. Once he arrived in the kitchen, he quickly set about making breakfast. Having decided on some rice with fish and pineapple, once everything was cooked, Izuku sat down at the table and looked over Mei's text from last night that he had kind of skipped over. "I'm going to watch you train tomorrow." Well, today was tomorrow, so Izuku prepared to see Mei at Gym Gamma. Yet that brought a question Izuku hadn't been able to focus on last night. Mei should be getting prepared for the sports festival too, finishing her gyrospheres and testing them. Yet Mei didn't say she was going to train or practice with Izuku, she was just going to watch. That raised another question. How long was Mei going to watch? Izuku didn't think it would be very long, as she would eventually get bored and go back to the support department. Mei wasn't the kind of person to be away from her workstation for long. And whenever Izuku pulled her away to go do something, she always fought and tried to sneak back. Even when she willingly sat down to do something, play games, or watch a movie, Izuku could always tell that when she hit her hand she was moving them as if she was drawing a blueprint. No point in wondering, Izuku thought as he finished up his breakfast and headed out to catch a bus to UA. After a quick bus ride, Izuku walked through UA's front gate and headed to the support department, where he scanned his ID and headed to classroom G6. After another security wall, Izuku walked in and grabbed his equipment, as he was ahead of schedule this time. Izuku took his time as he slipped the gauntlets and boots into his backpack and headed to Gym Gamma. He was not only surprised to see Mei waiting for him, but was surprised to see her willing up so early in the morning. Her hair even looked freshly cleaned, and she wore a pair of fresh jeans overall and actually had the straps over her shoulder instead of hanging down around her waist, and over her shoulder was a camp chair. "Good morning, Hatsume," Izuku said as he pulled off his backpack and headed inside. Mei didn't say anything as she followed Izuku inside, a small content smile on her face as she did so. Walking in, they were greeted by Hawks, who were waiting in the middle of the gym. "Good morning, Midoriya. Happy to see you as well, Hatsume. Have you come to train with us?" Hawks then noticed the camp chair slung over her shoulder. "No, I've just come to watch. I wanted to take a break from inventing," Mei said. Izuku tried and did somewhat of a good job hiding his surprise. Never, not once in the years Izuku had known Mei did she ever willingly, to this level, take a break from inventing. If Izuku was a pedantic boyfriend, he would check Mei for fever, rash, or any sign of sickness as she was not acting like herself. To force his mind from that, Izuku turned to Hawks and asked, "What are we working on today?" "Well, we've worked on mobility and defensibility. Time to finish the trifecta with offensive ability," Hawks said. "I don't think defensibility and offensive ability are real words," Izuku said as he pulled out his gauntlet. "Maybe, but you get the point. Being able to dodge and not get hit. It's good and all, but doesn't mean anything if you can't hit back," Hawks said. "What, you don't think I know how to throw a punch?" Izuku said. He knew how to throw a punch. He had training from Crimson Dynamo. Of course, he knew how to throw a punch. "All right, try to make a first with your equipment on," Hawks said. Izuku rolled his eyes, then made a fist with his right hand. Well, tried to at least, but his hand was stopped from fully closing as the repulsor got in the way of his fingers. "All right, clearly I can't make a fist." Izuku tried not to blush as Mei let out a small giggle, before promptly shutting up and standing at military-style attention. Her eyes were glued forwards and looking up, as Izuku directed his focus once again back to Hawks. "You can get the basic shape of a fist, but if you tried to punch normally, your fingers would hit before your knuckles, resulting in you hurting your hand more than whatever you hit," Hawks said, then pointed up. "That's why we'll be training with that." Hawks pointing up, causing Mei and Izuku to follow his line of direction to find a punching bag hanging from the ceiling. "You know, your training has been kind of low budget," Mei absently said out loud. "Well, it's not like I had much time to get everything together. It would have taken at least a week to get all my training equipment from my agency. and another 2 days to get everything set up, Hawks said, though not sounding that offended as he was given the offer and knew he had a limited time when he gave the offer. Yeah, I noticed, but it's working, so not much I can complain about, Izuku said as he continued to look up at the punching bag, getting a feeling he would need to soak his hands in ice when he got home. Well, let's get up there and start training, Hawks said, kicking off from the ground and rising up to the punching bag. Izuku looked over at Mei, who was already pulling out her camping chair and setting it down on the ground. I'm good to watch from a distance, Mei said as the crosshair of her irises zoomed in and out. Izuku chuckled a bit as Mei swayed before and forth a bit from her sudden and quick change in depth perception. Izuku took a few steps away from Mei, then ignited his equipment and flew up to Hawks. Once he was level with Hawks and the punching bag, Izuku decreased his power and hovered in the air. So you want me to start by trying to punch the bag, Izuku said, as that's how the past 2 days of training had gone. Hawks always had Izuku try something before explaining anything. Yeah, you're starting to catch on. Aerial combat is something you only learn through practice, Hawks said. Izuku huffed and cut the power from his right repulsor, instantly having to wave his left hand around a bit to regain his balance. Once he had stable footing, Izuku threw his right fist forwards and hit the punching bag. With a solid thud, the bag swung back a bit, as did Izuku. He quickly stopped himself and moved back to the bag, his mind working on the problem. His mind going back to when he first tested the gauntlets at Hatsume Industries. He was thrown back from the force generated as he hadn't properly stood his ground, thus resulting in no leverage. It's in Jiraiya, Newton's third law of physics. When I hit the punching bag, it pushes against my hand with the same amount of force, and since I don't have anything to stabilize against, like the ground, I'm sent backwards, Izuku said, as he held his right first against the bag but didn't push against it. You don't have the ground to stabilize against, but you do have your repulsors, Hawks said, but they're keeping me up. I can't angle them to push me forwards or I would drop. Izuku paused for a second. I meet in the middle. Instead of tilting a whole 90 degrees, I go somewhere between that, 40 to 45. That way the force is directly opposite of my punch. Izuku threw back his right arm and readied it again. Then in sync, he threw his right arm forward while angling his feet back. His fist hit the bag, but unexpectedly, Izuku continued to go forward and crashed into the bag. Izuku dropped a bit in the air before he managed to catch himself. Hawks had a small smirk on his face as he said, the bag can only withstand so much force before moving, and since you continued to apply more force to it, you chased after it. But how am I supposed to know when to stop moving forward? Izuku asked as he looked between his mentor and the punching bag. That's the funny thing, you don't, Hawks said, as he drew his feather blade and used it to cut the punching bag. You can do what I like to refer to as a slow attack, or... Hawks moved back from the punching bag and rose a bit into the air. Then he dove straight at the punching bag, holding his blade out to cut the bag along its side, or a fast attack. Normally I need some room to get up to a good speed, but with your equipment that shouldn't be such a big issue. Why don't you give a fast attack a try? Izuku nodded as he hovered away from the punching bag, giving himself plenty of room to get a running start. Acceleration was not issued, but Izuku wanted to give himself time to bail if something went wrong. With a sharp breath, Izuku leaned forward and blasted towards the punching bag. As Izuku got near, he cut off the power to his right gauntlets and held out his right first, noticing that he didn't have to shift his weight over to his left side. At the last second, Izuku threw his right fist forward and it connected to the punching bag. With a crack, the punching bag immediately flew backwards. Izuku's punch was so strong that it swung on its chain and quickly rose until it nearly hit the ceiling. Luckily, Izuku was already out of the way, as it began to fall back down, allowing Hawks to catch it so they didn't have to wait for it to lose its momentum. Izuku flipped around and looked at the punching bag. It was weird. His attack was so much stronger and more controlled. Sure, his speed had easily added to the force behind Izuku's fist, but that didn't explain why it felt so much easier to throw the punch than when he was trying to hover. So how did it feel? Hawks asked as Izuku hovered back over. Easier, like I had more control. When I raised my fist to attack, I didn't have to shift my weight like I had to when I was hovering, Izuku said. But why was that? He had thrown the punch the same. He hadn't thrown it any harder than his first punch. The only difference was he was moving forward before he attacked. Izuku scoffed and realized what was happening. It was a simple physics lesson that he had completely skipped over. A spinning top had more stability than if it was standing still. Since Izuku had been moving forward, inertia and momentum had kept him up. In aeronautics terms, lift had kept him up. It was lift because I was already moving forwards. The momentum kept my body stable until it sped down enough for gravity to take over, Izuku said, smiling as if that could be the only possible explanation. Hawks nodded. When you use your equipment to move, you have complete control over that, but gravity and such don't just disappear and regain control when you stop using your equipment. These forces, you'll have to learn to fight against, but as you've probably realized, your attack was a lot stronger the second time. You have force behind it because you have more speed, so you'll also have to learn how to use gravity in your fights. I think I'm starting to understand how to fight in the air, Izuku said as he stared back at the punching bag. Good, because you've only got 2 more days before the sports festival. Let's get as much of an aerial advantage as possible, Hawks said. As training went on, Hawks had Izuku practice slow and fast attacks on the punching bag. Slowly, Izuku got a feeling of how to hold his body in the air to keep him stable and deliver as much force as he could behind every attack. After breaking for lunch, Hawks took down the punching bag and had Izuku SWCH to attacking him. At the beginning of such training, the Hawks easily dodged Izuku's attack without throwing back any counters at all. But eventually, suddenly and without warning, Hawks began to attack Izuku after his failed attacks. After the first time, Izuku was hesitant to attack again. But Hawks explained that not every attack of Izuku's was going to land and he had to be ready to dodge or block the incoming attack. Izuku decided to focus on the former, using his speed to dodge Hawks' attack and ready himself for another pass. Hawks congratulated Izuku on that decision as it was important for an aerial fighter to keep their aerial advantage. As soon as you are kept on the ground by your opponent, you've lost most of your mobility. A smart villain will know this and will try to keep you on the ground, so it's important to get back into the air as soon as possible. You regain your mobility and get out of their range if they don't have any projectile, Hawks said, as Izuku got out of Hawks' melee range before diving back into the attack. They continued to train and practice the whole afternoon, and if blessed by the gods, Hawks called the day early, around 3, a good 3 hours earlier than Thursday and Wednesday, something Izuku was extremely grateful for, as he fell on his butt to catch his breath. His body was exhausted, but his mind had been firing on all cylinders since he had seen how Hawks cut the punching bag with his feather sword. Izuku knew he needed a more melee-based option for fighting and had been working on it for the past week, and seeing Hawks close up had given him some ideas. So after dropping his equipment, Izuku stayed in room G6 to spend some time on his idea. A hidden blade in his gauntlet, on the outer forearm that could pop in and out whenever Izuku needed them. The perfect tool to use for the close-quarter combat that the third event of the sports festival was bound to be. So Izuku worked late in the evening, only leaving it half-finished as he had said to work on it. As he walked through the front gate, Izuku had a smile knowing he was more than prepared to give it his all. After working Saturday and a bit of Sunday, Izuku woke up with his face against the holo table. It was turned on and showed Izuku's newest additions to his suit finished and set to manufacture. Izuku blinked at the bright light and rubbed his eyes until his vision cleared up and the world came into focus. Izuku yawned as he sat up and looked at the hologram floating in front of him. It was a pair of retractable blades, taken from Hawk's feather sword. Each gauntlet held a hidden blade and would help with close-quarter fights. Izuku shook his head as he saw a notification that the blades and their mechanisms had been built and added to the suit. He began to smile, wanting to test them out, but then his eyes got the clock on the wall. It read 8:23 and Izuku realized it was now Monday. The sports festival began at 9. Jebisu, give me my gauntlets and boots, Izuku said as he swiped his arc reactor from the holo table and then turned it off. He walked over to the corner where the equipment he requested would appear. Which pair would you like? Jebisu asked. Izuku thought about it for a second. There was no telling what the first event was going to be and his equipment could get dangerous. Sure, he improved and made them stronger, but the UAS entrance exam was fighting giant robots. How much bigger would the sports festival be? My primary pair might get broken, so give me both. Right away, sir, Jebisu said, and shortly Izuku's primary gauntlets and boots appeared. Izuku slipped his hands and feet into them and began tightening the screws while Izuku's old prototype gauntlets and boots appeared. The main difference between the pairs was the prototype gauntlets overheated after a few shots and the prototype boots were unable to achieve lift, but it was better to have them in case the Izuku primary set got broken during the events. With his primary pair of gauntlets and boots now, Izuku slipped his arc reactor under his shirt and worked the wires. Once he heard the sound of his equipment powering up, he swiped the prototypes and shoved them into his backpack. And with that, he was ready to head to the stadium. He made time to stop by the lunchroom and get breakfast from Lunch Rush. He found Mei eating her breakfast by herself in the lunchroom. Izuku sat across from her and began to eat. You ready? Yeah, I'm a little nervous, but it will be fun. This will be a good opportunity for some marketing, Mei said, looking down at her breakfast, toast, eggs and fish. Mei, Izuku said to make sure he had her attention. Do you remember what I said on Friday about marketing? Izuku looked Mei in the eyes as he spoke. He took a sip of milk as he waited for her to answer. Mei tried to look away but eventually met Izuku's eyes. She hated how much his nonsense logic affected her. I'm not allowed to embarrass the other students. Izuku nodded, then asked, and what are you planning on doing? Not embarrassing other students, Mei said with a huff. But how was she supposed to show off all of her babies? She could only wear so much equipment before it became a hindrance, and if the other student agreed to it, why shouldn't she be allowed to do it? Good. Now let's finish up and head down to the open ceremonies, Izuku said. Now that might become an issue later now, but he would just have to keep an eye out for it. Together they finished their breakfast and then headed down to the stadium. Because Hawks had decided to stay in town, Principal Nezu made him work as security for the event, with the promise he could watch the matches from the air. Hawks landed next to them and walked with them to the stadium. Well, I would have to say this is the biggest crowd for the first years I've ever seen. Most must have heard the news about Class 1 getting attacked. Heard 2 students were pretty injured. Yeah, the spotlight might be on them, but soon they'll be sharing it with Izuku. Mei smiled, quieting her fears that she wouldn't be able to see Izuku as much once he got transferred, by focusing on how happy he would be when he got transferred. Come on, I've seen them training. They have 4 powerhouses. One of them is even Endeavor's son. No one is going to notice me, Izuku said. He knew that if he went against one of the Class 1 powerhouses, then he would most likely be defeated. However, if he won, he would be shoved into the spotlight. Maybe that would help him get transferred to the hero course more quickly. As they walked, they came across a crowd of people who were looking around the stalls, which were selling hero merchandise and other goodies, before the festival officially began. As people began to notice Hawks, Izuku and Mei tried to hide their faces, but besides their clothes, Izuku only had his backpack, and holding that up would only draw more attention to him. Hawks noticed this and with a smile, said, "All right, this is where I leave you. The opening ceremony is starting in 30 minutes. Make sure you're there and ready." Both students nodded and Hawks took off, the crowd following him as he rose above the stadium roof to take his position for the event. With the attention away from them, Izuku and Mei quickly snuck their way through the crowd and into the stadium. They quickly scanned their student IDs and went through a door that led to the student waiting rooms. "Come on, I still need to get my gear on," Mei said as she walked over to a table that had her hover shoes and the corresponding equipment. As Izuku followed Mei, none of their fellow support students glanced at them. Then while Mei slipped on her equipment, Izuku sat down and waited. Today was the day. Izuku had trained so strong for the entrance exam and had failed. And since then he had been building and training, preparing. Today was the day he saw if that meant anything. Would he be able to show off his tech to the world and prove that he belonged in the hero course? He hoped so because he had done so much training to get here and he wasn't going to let it go to waste. As Mei slipped on her goggles, she looked over at Izuku and asked, "Where's your suit?" "Still in G6. I'm probably not going to need it until the 3rd round when the one-on-one starts," Izuku said. While the first 2 events were for most elimination rather than start-up fighting, the event still pitted all the students against each other, so some fight was going to occur. But Izuku still hoped that his speed would help him get around those. Finally, one of the students in the rooms noticed Izuku and Mei and asked, "What is all this?" Every student in the support department, even the 2nd and 3rd years, knew who Izuku Midoriya was. The student who got special treatment had his own room to build stuff in. He never got in trouble for not paying attention in class. While that ticked off most support students, what ticked off the 3rd year was that Izuku was better at inventing than them. Their teacher made sure of that. As word of Izuku's repulsor technology was made known and they had heard word from the 3rd year hero course student that they had seen Izuku flying in a suit. Projects like that were supposed to be allowed until the 2nd semester of the 2nd year. "This is our gear that we filed to use in the sports festival. We might be in the support department, but we're still going to try and do our best," Izuku said as he flexed his finger. While Izuku and Mei were the best 2 students in class, neither of them held the title of class president. That belonged to Zeke Sito, a well-respected bioengineer in his own right. He was one of the shorter students in classes. With his red hair and white tips, Zeke always looked at Izuku with his narrow eyes. Out of all the students in Izuku's class, he was the one that butted heads with Izuku the most. Izuku's seemingly arrogant personality ticked off Zeke to no end. "You really think you have a chance to do anything? What do you think the business has been doing for the past week?" Izuku looked over at Zeke, making deals with different sponsors to sell their product. "Exactly, because that's what they came to UA to do," Zeke said, standing up so strong he pushed his chair back. "But you've been arrogant since the 2nd day of school. You think because you can invent so well, you can be more. You think you can get transferred to the hero course. That's right. I know about your little deal with the teachers and you actually think you've got a chance. Oh, because Hawks gave you some pity and trained you for a week. And you think that's enough to make you a hero. And what's wrong with that? If it's Midoriya's dream to become a hero, then let him try," Mei said, jumping down from the table, stepping in front of Izuku and looking at Zeke. "Oh, and you." Zeke pointed at Izuku to emphasize his point. "You think because you have your repulsors you can become a hero. Well, I think that grand idea has gone to your mind and made you act like you're already a big-shot pro hero. I bet you wouldn't be such a great inventor if you didn't have a power loader in your corner." We've all seen him meeting you in that old classroom, getting special treatment. I bet he's the one that gave you the blueprints to your repulsor," Zeke said, pushing past Mei and getting in Izuku's face. He was bitter because he was supposed to be the best in the class. He deserved the special treatment, not some wide-eyed student who had failed the hero entrance. Yeah, Zeke knew about that. Powerloader should have never given Izuku that chance to get into the support department. He didn't deserve it. "Actually, it was my father," Izuku said. "Oh, see, you're just a freeloader. Someone else should have been given the blueprints. Someone that could have made something of them," Zeke said in a loud voice. Zeke had to claw tooth and nail to gain all of his knowledge and his achievements, but Izuku just had everything handed to him. Izuku gripped his hands tight, his repulsors humming a bit as Izuku's quirk sparked a bit. "You really think you can make something out of my father's designs? I would like to see you try. Good luck finding a power source," Izuku said, shouldering Zeke and headed for the door. "I can, and I won't have to rely on my stupid quirk to do so," Izuku heard Zeke yell before the door fully closed. He then heard it open and was ready for Zeke to punch him, but Mei ran up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "You know Sito is just working you up," Mei said as she squeezed Izuku's shoulder. "I know, he's never liked me before. He is just trying to push my button so I do something dumb and get kicked out," Izuku said as he looked down at the ground. "You know Principal Nezu and Powerloader would never expel you. Besides, once you get transferred, you won't have to deal with Sito and he'll finally shut up," Mei said as she rubbed Izuku back. "Yeah, but then there will be Kaken. It seems no matter where I go I have to deal with a Kaken," Izuku said as he stopped and put his back against the wall. He then slowly sat. "You'll always have me," Mei said, sitting down next to Izuku. "Sito is just mad that he's met you. I've looked over his file. He's won a few competitions and had a few companies willing to hire him right out of UA. Sutin Co. is one of those. But then he met you and you proved yourself to be a better engineer." He took some blows to his ego. "But Sito's right. I didn't make my repulsors. I just copied my father's design. I probably would have never come up with these if my mom hadn't given me those blueprints," Izuku said, dropping his head in between his legs. "Maybe, but he made them for you, so you need to use them. You might not have made them, but you did improve them. You added your name to the blueprints," Mei said. Izuku laughed a little at the corny metaphor. "Thanks, Hatsume. I've made so many people help me. I guess I forgot I can stand on my own. I think I'm more ready than I was before." Mei's heart dropped a bit as Izuku spoke. She was happier than Izuku was about to stand on his own, but that meant eventually he won't need her anymore. She watched with hollow eyes as Izuku picked himself up and held out a hand to help her up. "Come on, let's go show the world what we can do," Izuku said. Mei beamed brightly at that and greedily accepted Izuku's hand. She was more than happy to show Izuku what her inventions could do. "Welcome to this year's sports festival. For this stadium we have the first years, so now is the time to make sure that you're in the correct stadium. But if you're not, then you're going to surely miss a spectacle. I'm Present Mike and I'm here with my co-host, Eraserhead. Eraser, any words you like to say?" Present Mike said, hyping the crowd as the cannon and confetti went off to signal the start of the festival. "I'd rather be in bed right now," Mr. Aizawa said as he worked with his wrapped arm to get a straw into a coffee mug. As his arms were still in casts, it would be impossible to hold a mug, so Mr. Aizawa had made sure to bring plenty of straws. "But then you would miss seeing how wonderful the students are. Speaking of students, here they are now. Starting with the hero Kraus, we have 1A. They survived a deadly villain attack and have gained so much experience from it. Right behind them, this class hasn't had the limelight on them yet, but they are just as awesome. It's Class 1B. From the general class it's C, D and E. Then from the support course, it seems some of the students have brought along their invention. It's Class F, G and H. Then from the business course it's I, J, K. As each class was called, its students walked out into the field in the middle of the stadium. Izuku looked around and saw that every seat was taken up by parents, siblings, and pro heroes. "I found them," Mei said, grabbing Izuku's shoulder and jumping up and down. "Where?" Izuku asked, knowing Mei was referring to her parents. The Hatsume had made a point of accepting their yearly tickets from whatever pro heroes had extra. They usually turn them down, just saying they'll catch the highlight. But since Mei and Izuku were participating, they decided to come in person. The section under the banner that is Present Mike's podcast logo. 5 rows down, seats 18 and 19. "They're with Crimson Dynamo," Mei said. Izuku followed Mei's instruction, and while he couldn't spot Mrs. and Mr. Hatsume, he could spot Mr. Hatsume's pink dreadlocks that were all too similar to Mei's. "Did your mom say if she would be here? I can find her for you." "No, she's still in Fukuoka, probably in her meeting with the board of directors," Izuku had to yell as the sound from the crowd was deafening. "For this year, we have the R-rated pro hero Midnight as our in-field announcer and referee," Present Mike said, drawing the crowd's attention to Midnight as she stood up and held out her microphone. "Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Present Mike. I'm happy to see the excitement our students have generated today," Midnight said. Izuku heard offhand comments from the other students that Midnight's costume was not appropriate for the event. and that it should come with a warning. Before we begin, we will have the student pledge by Katsuki Bakugo, who placed first in the hero course entrance exam. Izuku looked over the crowd and quickly found Bakugo's spiker ash blonde hair. Izuku watched as his old childhood friend moved through the crowd and up to the stairs that led up to midnight. As Bakugo climbed the stairs, Izuku noticed he was scanning the crowd, and then the two of them locked eyes. Zeke Sito could threaten, bully, and throw glares at Izuku all he wanted, but he could never be on the same level as Bakugo. Izuku quickly dropped his head and hid from Bakugo, but he could feel Bakugo's eyes on him as he walked up to the microphone and spoke into it. "I'm only going to say this once. I'm going to win." The crowd went silent for a moment. Midnight knew Bakugo had a bit of an ego, but she was not ready for that. Neither were the students on the field as they all began yelling at Bakugo. Probably would have begun to throw tomatoes like they were at a bad play if they had any. As Bakugo walked back down the stairs, he yelled out, "Not my fault. The rest of you are stepping stones on my way to victory." He walked back to Class 1A, where Gaizan promptly put himself between the hothead blonde and everyone else. While Gaizan may not like Bakugo's attitude, he rather not have everyone try to attack Bakugo. That would just result in people getting hurt, and enough people joined in, maybe Bakugo too. Gaizan just looked forward, over Bakugo's shoulder and up at midnight. You could have phrased it differently. Bakugo spun around on his heels and looked ready to kill Gaizan. "Oh yeah, how you have Fate 582ing phrased it. I challenge you to try and take first place from me." That would be how I would phrase it if I was a hothead. Gives you more of a challenge, since everyone will be coming after you. Gaizan said with a shrug of his shoulder. "I'll be in first. Everyone will be coming after me anyways." Bakugo said. "Yet, Todoroki gave his declaration of war to me, even compared me to All Might." Gaizan said, and Bakugo growled. Though Gaizan kept his displeasure of being compared to the blonde idiot a secret, and by making it a challenge you could have made it more personal. Everyone reacts more when their pride is wounded, Gaizan said, stopping himself from saying Bakugo was Exhibit A. Bakugo growled and turned away from Gaizan. "Exhibit A. Now it's time for us to get started," Midnight said, raising her WHP and cracking it to silence the crowd and get everyone's attention back on her. "UA really doesn't believe in giving us a chance to catch our breath, huh?" Ochako said, and everyone around her agreed with a nod. "Now what will be the first fateful event of this year's sports festival?" Midnight said, drawing everyone's attention. She cracked her WHP and the Jumbotron behind her turned on and began showing off a roulette of all the different events. Izuku caught some that said, Paint Field, Trivia Show, Fishing, and Scavenger Hunt among others. As the 30-second mark passed, the roulette began to slow down and took another 10 seconds before it stopped and landed on. Stadium Dash will be the first event, Midnight said, with another crack of her WHP. In this treacherous contest, all 11 classes will participate. Within this contest, everyone will have to run a 4-kilometer track around the stadium. They will have to evade, dodge, fight, and overcome a number of different obstacles to make it to the end. And I'd rather not restrain anyone, at least not yet. Gaizan felt his right fist clench extremely tightly, and it was not helping that Midnight gave a seductive look as she was looking directly at Gaizan. How did Gaizan know his modern art teacher was looking at him? Well, she had recently told him that it had become one of her life missions to get him to blush at her antics. Gaizan shook his head, showing he wasn't smitten. Midnight's smile dropped for a split second, but she refocused and continued with the explanation. "So as long as you are on the track, you're free to do whatever your heart longing. Whatever you can to slow down your opponent. Now then, take your place, contestants." Suddenly the noise of a large metal gate opening echoed through the stadium, drawing everyone's attention to a metal door that was opening that obviously led out to the track. However, none of the students noticed how narrow the hallway behind the door was. Izuku was pulled along in the crowd as all the students raced over to the starting line. Once Izuku was able to find his footing, he was able to make a clear thought. He thought about everyone who had helped him, Hisashi, Inko, Mei and her parents, Principal Nezu, Paoloder, and Hawks. Each of them had helped Izuku get to where he was. From helping him find his passion in engineering to growing his skills, to making a clear path forward, showing what he had to do to become a hero, always believing in him. Now it is time to prove he belonged somewhere special. As Gaizan walked with the student body, he caught up to Ochako and smirked. Ochako knew what that smile meant. During their training, Ochako had tried to get Gaizan to hold open more about his past. At the moment, Ochako hadn't realized, but after the USJ attack, Gaizan only talked about his father's story, not his own. She tried to trip him up with complex questions or suddenly ask them in the middle of a conversation, hoping he would absently answer. Yet not a single word out of Gaizan. While All Might explained a bit more about One for All and was happy about the new information he had against All for One, Ochako wanted to learn about her new mentor. She had begun to give up hope until she offered a deal to Gaizan. During the sports festival, if they fought each other and Ochako won, Gaizan would have to talk about his past. Gaizan countered with the bet that he won. Ochako had to tell him about when All Might offered one for all to her while stating that because of the bet he wouldn't hold anything back during their fights and proposing that if they didn't fight each other, whoever got the furthest would be the winner. Ochako quickly accepted Gaizan's term. He already knew about one for all and how bad would it be if he learned why she got it. Besides, Gaizan had proven he could keep a secret, so Ochako saw it as a fair trade. So you ready or what? Gaizan said as he cracked his neck by twisting it. Yeah, you ready to have your butt beat? Ochako said as she stretched her shoulder. I think you forget. No matter how strong you hit, I can hit back harder. Along with the fact that you don't have good control over one for all and still have the tendency to injure yourself. Gaizan whispered into Ochako's ears so no one could hear him. Yeah, I remember. Don't localize the power. Let it flow through you like BLD. Input-output. Got it, Ochako said, remembering the different advice Gaizan gave her as he taught her how to control one for all. After a few sessions, Ochako had gotten a handle on using one for all and could control about 3%. However, she struggled with her focus during fights, causing her to either use 100% or stop using it entirely. I'm starting to hate the smuggle look you get. Sorry, but it's the only one I've got, Gaizan said, smirking. And I'll wear it until you beat me, using one for all. If that's what it takes, fine, Okaho said as they arrived at the giant door and it stopped moving out of the way. The lights above the door flashed red and then turned green as a buzzer went off. And then all hell broke loose. Every single student was pushing, shoving, clawing to move forward and out of the stadium. So what is the first obstacle our students will have to face today? President Mike asked. The door, Mr. Aizawa said. Gaizan couldn't help but think that Mr. Aizawa was a little late with that analysis. He pushed a student forward, only to feel 3 more people squeeze him from all sides. It was going to take forever to get out. Then he felt a small chill fill the air, a feeling that drew his mind back to the first hero class, where Todoroki had frozen an entire building to win. Gaizan looked up and saw an ice cloud rise from the front of the mess of students. Gaizan quickly jumped up, just as a layer of ice froze everyone to the ground. As he landed, Gaizan cracked the ice under his feet and then looked forward to the ice that Todoroki had built an ice wall to stop anyone from moving forward. And Todoroki of Class 1 has given himself a massive lead. It will take a while for students to free themselves and then they'll have to deal with the ice wall, President Mike said. Agreed, but Todoroki underestimated some of his classmates, Mr. Aizawa pointed out. Using a bit of his quirk, Gaizan jumped onto the shoulder of 2 of the other students and saw that Kirishima, Audryu, and Shoji were the ones that also stayed free. That made sense as those 3 were in the mock fight with Todoroki. Gaizan leapt forward and within 2 jumps made it to the front, where Kirishima and Shoji were trying to break the ice. When Gaizan joined them and punched the wall, he immediately knew that the ice wall was very thick, well over a foot thick. With a smile, Gaizan powered up his right arm and punched it against the ice wall. Small cracks formed up the wall, but it managed to stay together. Give me a try, a green-haired student said as he landed next to Gaizan. He held his hand, palm open, against the ice wall, then his hand glowed and a concussive force ripped the wall apart. As the ice cleared, Gaizan got a good view of the equipment around the green-haired student's arms. While Iron Mantra had a complete suit and Gaizan had no way of knowing the electrical system within. Gaizan would never forget that sound of the repulsors, and the disc in the green-haired student looked the same. Could the student next to him be related to Iron Mantra? The similarities in the tech couldn't be missed. If Gaizan was not on national television and having to worry about the sports festival, though he didn't care about winning, this was just a way to get his name Gaizan Hisahito known. If none of that was happening, Gaizan would instantly be on the green-haired student, asking where he got his tech. As Iron Mantra was tied to the League of Villains, and if the green-haired student was related, he could be a spy. The green-haired student waved to Gaizan and said, "All right, bye." Izuku took off through the now open doorway and out into the actual track, only to find that Todoroki had frozen the floor outside, making it extremely difficult to walk across. Izuku smirked. Since training and practice with his boots, Izuku had begun to gain a good sense of balance. Guess I'll have to try something new, Izuku said, taking a running start and jumping out onto the ice. It took a few seconds to regain his balance, but once he did, Izuku began skating across the ice, directing a small portion of power to his boot to add to the frictionless ice to help him glide more smoothly. I love your idea, Gaizan said, as he began skating behind Izuku. I haven't been ice skating since I was a kid. While Izuku and Gaizan continued to skate across the ice, more and more students were beginning to free themselves and make it outside the stadium. Each of them had their own way of making it across the ice. Bakugo was using his explosion to fly. Momo had made herself a pair of ice skates, taking the idea from Izuku and Gaizan, though she struggled a bit to stay up. Audryu and Takoyami were using their quirk to slingshot to the front. Kirishima used his quirk on his feet to break the ice as he ran. Mina melted the ice under her feet and began skating across also, while Minda used the sphere from his head to provide a trampoline to jump across, while Ochako got a running start, took away her gravity, then went flying towards Gaizan. Hisahito, after you, I'm taking out Todoroki, Ochako yelled as she flew past Gaizan and Izuku. Deactivating her quirk, Ochako hit the ground, sliding on her knees like a foot player. With her speed, she was able to slide and slowly catch up to Todoroki, hopping up and running when she hit the end of the ice patch. Come on, Todoroki, that was a cheap shot, give me a real challenge. In the time leading up to the sports festival, Ochako had tried to keep her competitive nature on the down low. A few times it is shown through class, mainly coming out during her one-on-one training with Gaizan. Something about that smirk he always wore during training got her BLD pumping. And now in the middle of the race on international television, Ochako couldn't hold competitive herself back. She felt like tearing Todoroki a new one. Suddenly Minda came flying past Ochako and was easily gaining on Todoroki. Todoroki, I've outsmarted you. How pathetic. Once I win this competition, I'll have my pick of all the girls in our year, Minda said. Ochako didn't know to worry whether Gaizan had heard that. It seemed he had a sixth sense whenever Minda did or said anything inappropriate. Now she didn't need to turn around and see that Gaizan was baring his teeth. Suddenly the scream of Minda caught everyone's attention. He was suddenly flying over everyone's head, back in the direction of the start. Then a robotic voice said, "Target acquired. Mission termination." And it seems the leaders of the pack have arrived at the first real obstacle. Real steel. I bet we're in a treat with all the different enemies that have shown up. Truly a test of strength and cunning. Present, Mike said, giving a name to the hordes of robots that stood in front of the student. Those are the robots from the entrance exam. Ochako said. Everyone looked over and recognized the design of the 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers robots from the entrance exams. I don't remember the 2-pointers having miniguns, one of the general ed students said, and everyone agreed. It was only supposed to be a mild project, given out for the chance for extra credit, but done because Izuku had gotten bored. He needed something to distract himself from working his suit, as becoming too laser-focused could become a hindrance. So when Powerloader offered the assignment, Izuku took it. The assignment was to submit a blueprint of a design of how to improve the robots from the entrance exam, an idea that irked Izuku a little bit, as he was still fuming a bit over the entrance exam. The robots were designed well enough and had been a challenge for all, so why did they need to be improved? Because of this, Izuku was half tempted to submit a complaint. However, in the end his overachieving mindset won, and he submitted a blueprint of a chain-fed minigun that resulted in fewer jams happening, and the barrel wouldn't overheat as often. So as Izuku looked at the improved 2-point robot, he recognized his design and he had a sheepish look on his face. And he looked over at the other robots. Some didn't have any noticeable improvement, but most did. As Izuku looked at more and more robots, it was becoming more and more clear that Powerloader had taken the submitted design and added them to the robots for the entrance exam. As more and more students arrived and saw the robots, they all became increasingly worried. Many of them had struggled against the normal robots, but now they had been improved and had new weapons. The robots began attacking. RBB bullets were fired. Flamethrowers went off and fists were launched forwards to attack the students. Is UA crazy? A student yelled out, and from there, chaos continued. All of them had to duck, weave, dive, dodge, or use their quirk to protect themselves. Are they expecting us to die? How are we even supposed to get these? Izuku dodged some RBB bullets. They wouldn't kill, but they were harmful. As Izuku rolled from a flying fist, he noticed that Todoroki had barricaded him behind an ice wall. He looked over at the different robots and scoffed. If this is what everyone else had to fight during the entrance exam, that's just pitiful. I wish UA would actually put some effort into this since my father is watching. Izuku felt a small sting of annoyance. Not only had he helped design one of those robots, but those robots weren't what the entrance exam was. Even with the harder robots, Todoroki didn't even see it as a challenge. Todoroki stepped out from behind his barricade and sent a massive ice wave at the robots. Izuku was taken aback. He had seen Class 1 at training but had never seen Todoroki go this far. Now the sting that Izuku felt wasn't because Todoroki wasn't disillusioning himself, which he wasn't, but it was for the fact Izuku's design didn't hold against a hero course student. With the robots frozen, Todoroki took off and weaved his way through and got another massive lead. Other students noticed and began running towards the forest of frozen robots. But then the 1-pointers with the flamethrower began to thaw themselves out. Once they thawed, they turned and began freeing their companions, and within a few seconds the fight started all over again. Izuku had to dodge a launched fist from a 3-pointer and barely had a chance to breathe as a 2-pointer began firing at him. Izuku used his gauntlets to backstep and then looked up at the robots. While they had new weaponry and programming to handle weapons, it appeared that their base structure was the same, with only the three-pointer arms being rebuilt stronger to handle their extended arms. Hopefully, that would mean their internal wiring wouldn't be changed that much, as Izuku had a chance to look at the blueprints of the different robots. He knew where their weak spots were. The three-pointer's fist hit the ground next to Izuku. He sidestepped it and then flew his way up to the head of the robots. Drifting over and around its shoulder, Izuku grabbed its head and looked for a hatch that would have a SWCH under it. Yet Izuku couldn't find the hatch. It had been there on the blueprint. Maybe Powerloader had removed it, or it was just an entrance exam thing. Whatever the reason, Izuku had to move to Plan B. Dropping under the arm, Izuku shoved his arm into the shoulder joint of the robot. Due to its massive arm, and even more so now to its bigger arm, the three-point robot held a lot of wiring within its shoulder, and not taking a chance on the armor cutting the wires. The underside of the joints was exposed to the air. This allowed Izuku's arm to easily slip inside and unleash an uninterrupted shot at its internal computing system. Not only did the blast destroy the internal computer, but the heat from it fired the wiring. Izuku pulled out his steaming arm and waved the heat away. Then he jumped away from the three-point robot as it fell to the ground. He looked around and saw that many of the students were working there through the robots. Then he noticed that some of the robots were still frozen and had fallen over, which must have been Todoroki's initial plan. Then suddenly the back panels of one of the frozen robots caught Izuku's attention. The panels shook, then broke away, and Kirishima appeared. "Screw you, Todoroki. If that had been anyone else, they would have died," Kirishima said as he crawled out of the hole. He stood talking with the shirt torn to shreds, then took off running down the back of the robots and trying to get through the other robots. Then the back of another frozen robot busted open and Tetsu appeared. "You think you're funny, Class 1A. If that was anyone else, they would have died." Tetsu jumped out of the hole and began running forward. Izuku noticed that it was slow progress for everyone trying to through the robot's blockage. There were just too many of them to get through unscathed. But with all of the robots' attention directed downward, it left the sky open. And that's how Izuku was going to get through. It would be quick and nobody would notice until he was out of the clear. With that plan, Izuku took off and jumped onto the robot Tetsu came out of, as one of its legs was pointed up to the air and would provide a good ramp to jump off. So Izuku readied himself and then with an exhale, green lighting jumped across his eyes and he took off. He activated his boots to boost his speed as he quickly climbed the legs, and then jumped. As he leapt from the leg, for a single moment Izuku ignited his boots and gauntlets up to 5%. This resulted in him blasting over the horde of robots untouched. He sailed through the air and appeared to clear the robot horde, but then a three-point launched both of its arms into the air. Izuku used his equipment to right him and then dodged the attack. With that being the last obstacle, Izuku flew to the ground, using his equipment to stop himself from hitting the ground too strong, but he still had to roll to keep himself from becoming too injured. And it appears we have our second student, Izuku Midoriya, to make their way through the first obstacle. Present Mike announced, but it fell on deaf ears as Izuku looked forward and saw Todoroki slowly sliding across metal TZE wires. And the third student, Gaizan Hisahito, is through. That got Izuku moving again and he took off to the next obstacle. If he wanted to keep his place, then he would have to keep up the speed. Midoriya, Izuku Midoriya. That was the student in front of Gaizan, and it wasn't a name he recognized. Could he be from General Ed? Gaizan remembered the General Ed student Hitoshi Shinsu who was in the crowd that faced one after the USJ. He was the main student who talked about how students from Class 1 and 1B could be transferred out and replaced. A threat Mr. Aizawa confirmed was true, and how he would do so if a student from Class 1 didn't perform well enough. We now have a fourth place, Katsuki Bakugo. Present Mike announced, a name Gaizan recognized. Fighting against the hoarder of robots had lowered his quirk's energy, and he could do with a recharge, and he knew just where best to get one. He looked over his shoulder and the ash blonde of Class 1 glared at him. Gaizan decided to drop back to say hi. While Gaizan went to get a recharge, Izuku arrived at the next obstacle. It was a series of pillars jetting out of a massive hole. Connecting the pillars were metal TZE tight ropes. With Izuku's speed, he had to put his arms in front of him and use his gauntlets to kill his momentum. You students better watch your steps, or you'll be stuck and left behind in the fall. Present Mike announced. Izuku stood at the edge of the obstacle and looked down into the dark pit. No time to think of how UA could build something like this so quickly. He had a race to win. Izuku stepped onto the closet tightrope and began to walk across. Izuku took a few steps, but then his balance began to waver, so Izuku quickly stuck his hands out to the steps. His gauntlets quickly turned on, and this allowed him to keep his balance even as he began to speed walk across the wire. When Izuku reached the first pillar, he released a breath he didn't know he had and moved on to the next tightrope. With his boots and gauntlets, Izuku felt a little off balance, and his feet slipped a bit, but he was always able to catch him. He safely made it to the second pillar when he suddenly howled, "Look out below." Izuku barely had time to look up when something landed on the pillar and kicked up a cloud of dust. The cloud of dust was waved away and Izuku found him to be eye to eye with Gaizan. Gaizan's eyes were shining a bit yellow as he smirked at Izuku. "Oh, you're the green-haired student from the beginning that broke through Todoroki's ice wall. Izuku Midoriya, you're right. Yeah, and you're Gaizan Hisahito from Class 1A. Izuku said, showing he knew who he was talking to. Gaizan stole a glance at Izuku's equipment. Since Ironmonger had been wearing armor, there was no way of knowing what his internal equipment looked like. But the way Izuku had been using it and the sounds it made, it was too similar to be a coincidence. What was Izuku doing at UA if he had ties to Ironmonger? Gaizan needed to learn more about who Izuku Midoriya was. "I saw you flying earlier. Why are you doing it now?" Gaizan asked. Hook was set. Maybe the teacher didn't know about the similarities between Ironmonger and Izuku's tech. But Gaizan wasn't going to wait for them to do some. He needed to keep an eye on Izuku, and part of that was seeing what kind of person he was. "I'm waiting until the next round to reveal myself," Izuku explained, but he said it in a half-hearted tone, like he didn't believe it himself. "I'm testing myself." That sounded even worse in his head. He had training from Hawks and this wasn't the place for testing. That was during practice and in the lab. Smart, don't let your opponent know what you can do. But at what point do you hinder yourself more than your opponent ever could? As it won't help you if you don't make it. Now's not the time to test oneself. Now is the time to prove oneself. Besides, you were in second place. Gaizan looked behind him. "Well, bye." Gaizan smirked, then ran forward and then leapt to the next pillar. When he landed, he disappeared into another cloud of dust. Izuku tilted his head. "You were in second place." Izuku realized that he was in second place for a bit. His name had been announced and now Gaizan had taken it over. But then he had looked back, drawing Izuku's attention to look back too. What he saw terrified him. More and more students were reaching the fall, and leading the pack was a seeing red Bakugo. "Todoroki, Hisahito, I'll make you pay for that." Bakugo had arrived and shot him up across the chasm. Izuku was a little confused as to why Bakugo didn't spare a thought towards him. Todoroki and Hisahito must be bigger threats to Bakugo's ego than Izuku was at the moment. Izuku watched as Bakugo caught up to Gaizan, then passed him. Gaizan, however, seemed to smile as he was blasted in the face. "What the hell, I'm thinking. I am here to prove that I can be a hero. All I'm doing is holding myself back." Izuku looked at Gaizan leaping between pillars. "I shouldn't be content with any place besides first." Izuku looked down the hole in front of him. Screw it. With a strong resolve and deep breath, Izuku took a step forward. Then with no fear, Izuku fell into the chasm. As he free fell, Izuku started to enjoy the feeling a bit, but he knew he had to get back to work. Present Mike, who had been watching the race through the hidden camera laid throughout the race, did a spit take as he watched it happen. He couldn't believe that had a student fallen to their presumed death. The audience didn't know the net had been placed at the bottom, and it would only be time until Izuku's fall was shown and people would voice their concerns. He had to act fast. Shota," Present Mike said, rewinding the tape a bit to get a look at the student. "It was the kid Powerloader made a bet over. You know, that green-haired student from the support course that you and Powerload have a bet over. The one that destroyed part of UAS lawn with his equipment. Yeah, the one that got in trouble for flying over Fukuoka. Still, I think Hawks should have arrested him," Mr. Aizawa said, taking a small sip of coffee. "What about him?" "I think he just jumped into a hole," Present Mike said. Then noticed the Jumbotron showing the corresponding replay. Present Mike redirected his friend's attention to it and Mr. Aizawa spat out his coffee. Izuku took a single step forward and then quickly disappeared from view. What? Did the kid have a death wish? After the trouble he got into, Mr. Aizawa figured he would be smart enough not to pull off any more stunts like that. Where the hell did that come from? Present Mike was about to make a comment to ease the crowd about how there would be a net to catch him. But then a small dust cloud rose out of the hole. Then Izuku shot out of it. He flipped in the air, landing back on the pillar in a superhero pose, and he couldn't help the massive stupid-looking grin on his face. He hadn't realized how liberating and freeing this would feel. He stood up, confident that he had Japan's attention, so he took a running start and leapt into the air. His repulsors caught him. Then he leaned forward and shot forward, a massive dust cloud billowing behind him. Izuku flew across the chasm and began to catch back up the Gaizan, Bakugo, and Todoroki. Izuku smiled as he could only imagine the look of shock and horror on everyone's face as they watched him fall into the chasm. Moreover, Izuku could laugh as he imagined their reactions when he suddenly reappeared and then went flying down the course. He laughed as he caught up to Gaizan, who gave him a smirk and said, "Nice." All more to learn about who Izuku was. Izuku went flying past him and soon caught up with Bakugo and Todoroki. Izuku slowed his speed down a bit as his hair was starting to get in his eyes. He became neck and neck with Todoroki and Bakugo. They too noticed him. Todoroki was confused as he had never met Izuku before. Bakugo, on the other hand, the moment his eyes landed on Izuku, all he could see was red. Bikago had thought Deku had learned his lesson after the break-in, to never let him see Izuku ever again at UA. "Oi Deku, where the hell did you come from?" Bakugo then raised his right hand and shot an explosion at Izuku, who easily dodged by barrel rolling over to Bikago's left side. "Can you believe it? We have a three-way tie for first place and the students are duking it to see who earns the right to keep it," President Mike said. Izuku was not between Bakugo and Todoroki. Todoroki continued to run on his ice, while Izuku and Bakugo kept themselves up in the air. "I came from the support department." Izuku cut his right repulsor and threw a punch at Bakugo. As Bakugo had more experience in aerial combat, he more gracefully dodged the attack, but since he had used both hands to dodge, this allowed Izuku and Todoroki to gain some more distance. Bakugo yelled as he shot forwards to be tied in first place and then threw another explosion at Izuku. However, Gaizan suddenly appeared between them, his hand covering his face from the explosion. Gaizan's hand glowed a bit, then the glow transferred to his eyes. Izuku expected Gaizan to fall behind when he landed, but he simply hit the ground and kept up with them. Now it's a four-way tie as Gaizan Hisahito has caught up to the front. This is what the sports festival is meant to do, students giving it their all, fighting with everything they have to be number one. President Mike commented. Gaizan smirked at Bakugo and said, "Thank for the boost, Bakugo, it should last me for a way. See you at the finish," Gaizan said and began to speed ahead of the group, but the other three weren't going to lose him. "I'm going to kill you, Hisahito," Bakugo said as he increased his explosion. "I won't let you win again," Todoroki said, using his ice to slide forward instead of running. "I'm not done yet," Izuku said, increasing the power directed to his equipment, and the battle for first place began properly. Everyone else was fighting for fifth. As the four raced ahead, they asked WCH who was slightly ahead, keeping pace with each other. None of them gained much of a lead and none of them gave much of a lead. They didn't fight each other, just pushed themselves forward with all their strength. One was running to prove his father wrong, another was running to show he could be a hero, another was running to prove he was the best, and the last one was running to hide his past. And they ran until they passed a sign that Izuku directed his quirk to his brain to give him time to read it. It had a skull and crossbones and it read, "Danger Explosives." Izuku was confused about what that meant, but then a small CLCK sounded and suddenly a rather large explosion with pink dust sent Todoroki flying into the air. All were caught off guard by this as the three boys' eyes went wide. The front runners have reached the last obstacle, hot lava rocks. In front of them is a field hiding a multitude of mine. "Don't worry about being hurt, they're only strong enough to send you flying," President Mike said, then began to laugh. Gaizan slowed down so he could keep an eye on where he was stepping, while Izuku lifted himself a bit further from the ground. This allowed Bakugo to gain a lead and he began to laugh. "You extra are finally in your place." As Bikago laughed, he fell close enough to the ground that his foot brushed the ground, just in the right spot that a mine went off. What the F31626K? Bakugo was launched into the air, leaving only Gaizan and Izuku in the first place. Gaizan began to laugh as Bakugo continued to scream curses as he fell when suddenly Gaizan disappeared in a pink cloud. Izuku expected to see Gaizan go flying too, but then he ran out of the cloud and appeared to still be laughing. "I love this school." Gaizan set off another explosion and now his eyes were glowing yellow again. It seems the four-way tie has become a race between two students, Gaizan Hisahito and Izuku Midoriya, and it seemed no one will be able to catch up to them as they easily ran through the last obstacle of the race. Minefield. "Everyone better watch their feet or they'll be sent onto a wild ride into the air," President Mike said, as more and more students got past the fall and were reaching the minefield. Gaizan hit another mine, slowing down a bit so his quirk had a chance to absorb the kinetic and thermal power. His quirk was about 45% filled, so he caught up to Izuku and grinned as he asked, "How about a race to the finish line to see who is the fastest?" Izuku gave a small smirk. He never expected someone from the hero course to speak to him so casually like they were friends. But Izuku accepted the challenge. Sure, why not? Jebisu increased power to 10%. Go. A small beep came from the earpiece in Izuku's ear as he instantly sped up and a dust trail appeared behind him. He expected Gaizan to take a few more split seconds to go, but Izuku looked to the side as Gaizan was keeping pace. Gaizan had a dust trail behind him with pink smoke mixed in whenever he stepped on a mine. They raced across the minefield and were soon out of it and the home stretch was coming into view. Yet now one of them was running into an issue from the increased speed. Despite his hair being pulled back from the hair, giving him a clean line of sight, Izuku's eyes were starting to water from the wind rushing past his eyes. This made this vision start to go blur, and as Izuku was not confident in his natural instinct, he was afraid he would fly into something. This caused Izuku to slow down, and Gaizan did the same for a bit. Gaizan turned to Izuku. He was skilled. He knew how to use his equipment well, no doubt about that, but he was still only human, something Gaizan could go beyond. I look forward to seeing how you handle yourself, support students in the coming events. Gaizan then sped back up and left Izuku behind. But then he heard Izuku call out from right behind him, "You lit a fire under me, now you have to deal with the consequences." Izuku was not going to accept any place except for first. They were nearing the end of the track. There wasn't any room for more traps. So Izuku shouldn't have to worry about running into anything. And despite how blurry his vision was, he could still accelerate his mind to use the information it got from his eyes to stop himself from hitting anything. As Izuku redirected some of his quirk's electricity to his mind, he shot forward and caught up to Gaizan. Gaizan was still a good 2 to 3 paces ahead, giving him a clear first place, so Izuku pushed his output to 20% and began to slowly catch up to Gaizan. Gaizan felt a small electric buzzy sensation in the back of his mind. This caused him to look over his shoulder and see Izuku coming straight at him with green lightning jumping behind his eyes. Izuku caught up to Gaizan and began to pass him, so Gaizan responded in kind and used more of his quirk to keep the lead. And just in time, they reached the end of the track where it was redirected back into the stadium. Gaizan slid across the ground, leaving small trenches with his feet, while Izuku stuck his hands out in front, both coming to a complete stop as both knew they wouldn't be able to turn such a sharp corner at their current speed. "First one to the line," Gaizan said, his eyes narrowed on the light at the end of the tunnel. "First one to victory," Izuku said as he exhaled, and the arc reactor light turned from blue to green. Then in sync, both took off into the stadium. It was now a fight of acceleration. And while Izuku thought he had it, Gaizan still had plenty of energy to expend and regain the lead. Not wanting to give up so close to the end, Izuku increased his power output up to 35% and slowly climbed to become neck and neck with Gaizan. Both were flying down the hallway until the morning light greeted them both. And the first student back is Gaizan Hisahito from Class 1A. Present Mike announced as the Jumbotron showed the photo finish with Gaizan a mere few centimeters ahead of Izuku. Gaizan slid to a stop, yet again digging trenches under his feet. This time much deeper than before. So deep in fact that his feet were underground. And right behind him is Izuku Midoriya from class. Am I reading this right? I don't believe this. I don't believe this. But in second place is Izuku Midoriya from Class 1H, which is the support department. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in UA history, a student from the support department won second place at the sports festival. Izuku instantly held his hand out in front of him, backflipping into the air, before cutting all power and falling to the ground. He landed with a fist and knee to the ground, then slowly raised his head and grinned at Gaizan. He couldn't believe he had earned second place in the sports festival. His equipment had worked and he was one step closer to his dream. "Ha, I nearly had you." "Yes, you did. I guess I was right. You're from the support department." "I mean, why else would you have such equipment?" Gaizan said, as he brushed some dust off of his UA tracksuit. Now that he wasn't running, he got a good look at Izuku equipment. They looked a little bare, but if they were that powerful, Gaizan was a little afraid of what power Izuku could hold if his equipment wasn't just bare bones. "Thanks, my father designed them for me," Izuku said as he stood up and rubbed his knuckles as they had gotten a little red from the landing. Gaizan nodded. So it was either Izuku standing in front of him or his father. Either one of them could have been involved with the USJ. Was that how the League of Villains knew to attack the USJ? Was Izuku a spy of theirs? But why the support department? Or was that Plan B? Either way, it would be a good excuse for why Izuku would have technology similar to Iron Mantra. But with technology that unique, Gaizan couldn't be the only one that noticed. Mr. Aizawa got a good enough view of Iron Mantra. Now Gaizan wasn't going to outright accuse Izuku. Maybe he didn't know about his father's involvement. His father might be using his son, the same way Gaizan's father did the same. And there was still the same chance they weren't the only ones with this type of tech. But Gaizan could tell from the power he felt coming from the boots and gauntlets they were solely working off of Izuku's quirk, making him lean more to the side that Izuku and his father were the only ones with the technology. Gaizan would have expressed interest in Izuku's tech, giving off the question he was curious about what could match his quirk, but then something had caught his attention. More and more students were finishing the race, and Gaizan noticed someone had decided to test his luck. "If you would excuse me, Midoriya, I have something I have to take care of," Gaizan said, holding a finger. He then turned from Izuku, and his natural resting expression, which to others looked more like indifference, became one of great irritation. Izuku nodded and Gaizan walked away to handle the issue. "Momoye Arazu has finished in 15th place, and my Neurominda has placed in 16th place with a creative method of finishing," Present Mike said, already knowing, along with Midnight, that something was going to happen because of Minta's creative end. Mr. Aizawa simply just didn't care. It was time for the small after show. As Gaizan walked up to Momo and Minta, he heard Minta comment something about finishing and the fact that he already had done so. A comment that went through one ear and out there another, but still made Gaizan grit his teeth in anger. "You are beyond unprofessional, Minta," Momo said, as she tried to reach back and grab the shortest student of 1A. He had latched onto her half through the minefield and refused to let go ever since. She was able to make a metal bat and hit Minta, not worried about acting ladylike. But then she noticed Gaizan walking up to her. No matter how strong she hit Minta, it won't be compared to what Gaizan was about to do. Hisahito, would you mind helping? Gaizan nodded, then grabbed Minta by the neck and ripped him off of one of Vice President. Miraculously, without pulling off Momo's track shirt, Minta appeared to be in a daze. So Gaizan lifted Minta up to be at eye level and growled, "What did I say earlier?" Minta didn't answer, so Gaizan growled, "Do I need to give you a reminder? You don't scare me, Hisahito. Besides, I'm within my rights. We were told we could do anything to win," Minta said, somehow gaining the confidence to actually look Gaizan in the eyes. Said confidence immediately disappeared as death entered Gaizan's eyes. This stare caused Minta to begin to squirm and try to break free, but Gaizan just tightened his grip on Minta's neck. "Then I'm within my right to do this. Now, what did I say earlier?" Minta looked like he was going to try and defend himself, but then his shoulder dropped and he said, "Not to do anything inappropriate." "And what did I say would happen if you did anything inappropriate?" Gaizan said. Minta didn't answer, but his struggle became more. Gaizan grabbed Minta's jaw and forced him to lock eyes. Gaizan gave Minta a view of death incarnate, causing Minta to stop resisting. Gaizan then finally let go of Minta and let him fall to the ground. "Now get out." Minta quickly picked himself up and ran away, moving his legs as fast as he could to get away from Gaizan as soon as possible. All the while Midnight had seen this, and while the race was over, she found it in her best interest to keep to herself and left Gaizan to lay down his law. "Thank you, Hisahito," Momo said as she tried to pull off Minta's quirk from her track shirt. She could easily take it off and create a new one, but she'd rather not be a modist on TV and not waste her quirk on that. "Do you want some help?" Gaizan said, dropping his glare and giving a small smile to Momo. Momo was confused about how Gaizan could help, but she nodded nonetheless. Gaizan grabbed the two purple spheres and pushed his quirk's energy into them. They glowed yellow and then disappeared. Momo waited for the back of her shirt to be ripped apart, but then felt the small weight disappear from her back. Momo looked over her shoulder and saw that Minta's quirk had been removed. She looked up to thank Gaizan, but found that he had already walked off to be somewhere else. Even though Class 1 for the most part became close friends with the exception of Bakugo, Todoroki, and Minta, Gaizan was still a mystery to them. He sat with them during lunch and talked with them, but most of the time he was just a silent observer. The morning was boring and Inko, grateful for the distraction of being able to listen to present Mike's highlights, meaning she was only half listening to the board of directors as they talked about the quarterly income of Suteen Co. Inko looked at the project road while it was projecting the real income of company. Inko knew full well that the amount within the folder in front of her didn't tell the full truth. It had backroom deals, personal expenditures, and all which were stricken from the records. But that won't account for half the money. No, the real income of Suteen Co. were black market deals. On Mr. Suteen's private computer, those had taken some time to find, but Inko was a patient person. So why hadn't she gone to the police? Well, while exploring the hidden server, Inko found a list of cops that weren't on their payroll but could easily be paid off. So if anyone caught word of Inko's plan, then one of the board members was bound to find out. Then it was just a matter of making her disappear. Even then, Suteen Co. was a well-respected company. No one would believe it had a shady underbelly. Yet at the moment, none of that managed to Inko. She was only half listening to the meeting. The other half of her attention was listening to the headphone that was in her right ear, which was connected to her phone. She was listening to the highlights of the UAS Sports Festival, and it was just reaching the end of the first event. And the first student back is Gaizan Hisahito from Class 1A. Present, Mike announced, then continued with, and right behind him is Izuku Midoriya from Class, hold on, am I reading this right? Izuku Midoriya from Class 1H. That's the support department. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in UA history, a student from the support department has won second place at the sports festival. Inko smiled and tried to contain herself. Izuku had won. He had gotten second place only to be beaten by one Hero Kraus student, meaning he had left the other 39 in the dust. As pride swelled in Inko's chest, she let out a semi-quiet yes that caught the attention of everyone else in the meeting, who turned to Inko. Chief Director Akinoa cleared her throat and then asked, "Is there something you would like to add to this meeting, Mrs. Midoriya?" Inko blinked a bit, as in her excitement she had forgotten where she was. She stared back at Chief Director Akinoa, the worst member of the board. Inko used her happiness over her son to hide her disdain. "Forgive me, I'm listening to UAS Sport Festival. And the first year just completed their first event." The entire board looked at Inko with contempt, until Oki-ran reminded them, "Your son is in the support department." Inko nodded. "How did he do?" As Ran asked that question, Inko could see in the other members' eyes they weren't expecting a decent answer. And why wouldn't they? What could a support student have against a hero student? Inko gave a smug grin and said, he got second, only a few seconds behind a hero course student. The board all gave false smiles and Idomio asked, what was the event? It's UA, it must be something challenging. Well, if you consider fighting against giant robots, a bottomless pit and a minefield challenging, then yes. And Izuku did well to stay in the lead for most of the obstacle course, Inko said, as President Mike continued to list off the student that had passed. Oh, well, keep us informed of how well your son does, Chief Director Akinio said, already thinking of a plan for how to use Izuku's success to have him intern at Suteen Co. and boost their standing within the hero community, while offering him an internship. It would be easier to watch mother and son if they were under the same roof. Back at UA, the crowd was cheering over the excitement of the course. There had been spectacular moves, amazing comebacks, and surprises all around. The only person not completely joining in on the celebration was Toshinori. He was happy for the student, yet with how tired he was, he didn't show much excitement. He was leaning against the railing looking down at the field. Gaizon getting first place was no surprise. His quirk just put him a step above his classmates. Yet it was surprising how into it he got. Toshinori was expecting Gaizon to leisurely his way through the different obstacles, and it seemed Izuku Midoriya was the reason for it. After the first meeting with the support student after the USJ, Toshinori hadn't kept too many tabs on him. He was a heroic teacher and he was a support student. They didn't often cross paths, only hearing from Eraserhead and Powerloader when Izuku had gotten into trouble with Hawks, and who could blame Toshinori as he focused rightfully on helping his successor. But now, Toshinori was wishing he had, as Izuku had come out of nowhere to get second, and just seeing how advanced Izuku's inventions were above everyone else kind of reminded Toshinori of his old friend David Shield. Even more, Toshinori had to hand it to Izuku, he was a good showman. Though Toshinori knew that there were ropes at the bottom of the pit, his heart still momentarily stopped when Izuku fell into the pit. But then Izuku came flying out and everyone got a good look at Izuku's eyes. Many would see that a fire had been lit under Izuku and that was causing him to do what he did. But Toshinori could tell, it wasn't a firing being lit, it was being fanned. Izuku Midoriya had something to prove. And was it that fire that had gotten Gaizon into the event? It looked like he was taking Izuku's actions as a challenge. As Izuku was trying to prove he could be a hero, was Gaizon trying to prove he was better than Izuku? Gaizon didn't portray himself as that, so why else had Izuku caught Gaizon's attention? First and second place did well enough. They conversed their strength until they knew they could gain the upper hand and keep it. Toshinori was pulled from his thoughts as he heard some students behind him. A group of business students were leaning against the wall and talking amongst themselves. But just look at them, they are both kind of plain looking. Second place having it worse, the second business student said, gesturing to Izuku and Gaizon. True, but first did have that small light showing going on with his quirk. And second place, being from the support course, he's going to have a lot of company looking at him. President Mike did say that a support student has never won second place before. A third business student said, yes, and look at this equipment. Anyone can see how advanced it is, but the question is what all his equipment can do. Simply make him fly? There are plenty of other heroes and support equipment that can do that. It will be interesting to see what else he can do, or is he just a one-trick pony? The first business student said. Toshinori nervously chuckled. It seemed the business course students were still as cutthroat as ever, analyzing everything and taking everything into account. But that's not to say they weren't wrong. Toshinori looked back, down at Izuku. With his green hair and freckles, he didn't stand out among the students with more unique features from their quirks. Though anyone with an inventor's mind would know the equipment Izuku was wearing wasn't some that could be brought off the shelf. Toshinori thought back to the holograms he had seen when he met Izuku. His focus had been on the villain's suit, but he had seen what Izuku's suit looked like. Toshinori almost wished he had gotten a photo of it to show to David Shield. Then David could tell him how advanced it was. Though Izuku might not appreciate that, copyright and all that. Yet if he was planning on wearing the whole suit, Class 1 and 1B had an even bigger surprise coming. And depending on when he put it on, he could easily make a big show out of it. Toshinori laughed a bit, reminiscing on his youth when he always tried to put on a good show when he showed up to a battle. Then cringed a bit as he remembered how often it didn't work. Down on the field, Izuku watched as Gaizon walked away to help one of his classmates from a different classmate. And though it was subtle, Izuku didn't like the look Gaizon had gotten when Izuku said his repulsors were his father's design. It is judgmental, but not in the same way Zeke judged him. What could Gaizon possibly be thinking about? Was Gaizon thinking that Izuku had only gotten second because of his equipment? Without it would he have never finished. Sure, Izuku wasn't as fit as the hero course student, but he wouldn't have let that stop him from doing his best. In the end, wasn't that the most important? Izuku's attention was drawn from his thoughts as he heard Mei's name was announced, and his worries quickly disappeared. He turned to look at the finish line, just in time for a blur to tackle him to the ground. Once Izuku's vision cleared, he looked up and saw Mei smiling down at him. He took in how exhausted she looked, but how proud she was to have gotten 40th. And it didn't help that the sweat on her arms was making them glisten. "I can't believe you got second. If you have flown from the start, you have gotten first," Mei said as she sat on Izuku's midsection. Her thighs instinctively began squeezing Izuku's side, and she managed not to blush at that. Whenever Izuku wore any of his equipment, Mei couldn't help but think of that dream she had. "Thanks, but I doubt it. Hisahito would have caught up to me anyhow," Izuku said, forcing his eyes to focus on hers, as he knew looking lower would not be gentlemanlike. And Inko had made sure to raise the most upstanding gentleman the world had ever seen. "So what made you suddenly start flying?" Mei asked as she pointed Izuku in the chest. She had seen him jumping into the pit and she had almost yelled her name, the screaming only not coming out because it got stuck in her throat out of fear. But when he reappeared, she couldn't help but cheer his name and then use everyone's confusion to jump forward some spots. "I realized I was holding myself back, though I had to wait to prove myself, when I should have been going all out from the beginning. Prove myself through everything, and I wasn't just a one-time kind of thing." "And good job yourself, you got 40th, Izuku said, shrugging his shoulders. Mei laughed, jumping up and down a bit. Hatsume, you're making it a little strong to breathe," Izuku said as the wind was knocked out of him. Nor did the location of her butt help Izuku's mind at all. But before his mind could wander to that place, his social awkwardness kicked in. Something Izuku had never been more thankful for than in that moment, as it kept his gentlemanly status. "Are you calling me fat, Izuku Midoriya?" Mei yelled as she stopped bouncing and glared down at Izuku, with a bit of playfulness in her eyes. Izuku's brain restarted and he was able to quickly laugh and say, "No, just your equipment and you're sitting on my lungs." It had been a long time since Izuku had gotten used to Mei's antics such as that, but it didn't help him with the small blush he got on his cheek. "Good answer," Mei said, as she got off of Izuku and then held her hand out. Izuku accepted Mei's hand and she hauled him to his feet. "So what now, Mr. Second Place?" As if to answer her question, Present Mike announced, "Now that all students have passed, we'll be taking a small hour break. After the break, the second event will be announced, all with placement. Come, let's see if we can find my parents and get some food," Mei said, grabbing Izuku's hand and pulling him off the field. In the hallways, Izuku and Mei weaved their way through the growing crowd until they got to the food court, where they found Mei's parents sitting at a table with a briefcase. A briefcase they had brought to store Izuku and Mei's equipment. And yet while Mei stored her equipment, Izuku opted to keep his on. He explained it by saying since his equipment had more screws and took longer to slip on and off, he was just going to keep them on for the day. But in reality, in his mind, his equipment gave him power to stand up for himself and show the world that he was. And after doing so well with said power, Izuku didn't want to depart with it. The Hatsume had already bought some food, so Izuku and Mei dug in, happy for the chance to refill their tanks. Mr. Hatsume had even brought a sports drink for Izuku that was filled with electrolyte. "I'm so proud that my daughter is moving to the second round." Mr. Hatsume wrapped Mei in a huge bear hug as she tried to stuff her face with noodles. Izuku smiled at the sight, though it made him wish that his mom could be there to congratulate him, but he knew she was listening through her phone. He would probably get a text once she was done with all of her meetings. "I only got 40th place. It was Izuku that got second," Mei said, trying and struggling to break the hug. Izuku guessed a perk of being an engineer was having massive grip strength, as Mr. Hatsume tightened the hug around his daughter. "Yes, that he did. I'm proud that you managed to get the flight issue taken care of. Though when you jumped down into that hole, I think you nearly gave everyone a heart attack," Mrs. Hatsume said, rubbing Izuku's hair. "Where's your mother?" "Sorry, I realized I was holding myself back. If I want to be transferred to the hero course, I need to prove myself. I figured doing that was a good way to get everyone's attention," Izuku sheepishly said. He should have figured that out sooner, but it was the first time he had been a part of something like this, so it was natural for him to revert to his isolated younger self. "As for my mother, she's still stuck in Fukuoka." "Well, you most definitely got everyone's attention, especially your stunt with the second obstacle." Afterwards, Present Mike had the Jumbotron stay on you and the students from 1A. The you and the yellow hair pulled ahead and everyone was on the edge of their seats. Hawk said, pulling out a chair and sitting down next to Izuku. "I saw you attack the blonde spiky-haired kid from class 1A. Your skills have improved since last week. You must be the Hatsumes." Hawks looked over at Mr. and Mrs. Hatsume. "I've had a chance to see your daughter work in action. I'm no engineer, but your daughter has real talent." Mr. Hatsume's eyes turned to stars. Having a chance to talk to such a high-ranking hero, he had been the same with Miroku Gamen for repair. Luckily for him, he was able to hide behind the amount of stardom Izuku showed. While Mr. Hatsume calmed himself down by taking a sip of water, Mrs. Hatsume deeply bowed. However, Hawk's smile faltered a bit and he said, "Mind if I borrow Midoriya for a bit?" "Sure," May responded. As before, her parents were dumbfounded, both still absorbing the praise of the number 3 hero. "Thanks." Hawks wrapped his arm around Izuku's shoulder and led him away from the crowd. They didn't say anything until they were alone in an empty hallway, at which point Hawks sighed and leaned against the wall. "Well, needless to say, you're screwed." Izuku was confused. He had a slow start, but he finished in second place. He had overcome the first event and people knew who he was. Izuku tried not to panic at that thought. People knew who he was. Not great to have when you're antisocial and an introvert. Yet what could Hawks be talking about? "What do you mean? I was able to use my training to get second." "That's the first time in UA history." President Mike said so. "I'm one step closer to getting transferred and I plan to keep that momentum forward. Show UA I deserve a second chance." Izuku tried to focus on that thought. "Yes, congratulations on that. By the way, I'm sure UA will be having a meeting about you and you're becoming transferred. But I mean you're screwed in terms of the Hero Public Safety Commission. After Fukuoka, they ID'd you and kept a close eye on you. They really want your father's suit. And your stunt at the second obstacle, well, in their eyes that makes you reckless and dangerous to those around you," Hawks said, shaking his head. Anyone who knew Izuku knew that wasn't who he was. It was just the HPSC choosing it to see that way, as that's how they saw Hasashi. "But I'm not," Izuku said with a huff. Sure, his stunt could have been reckless, his equipment could have failed and he could have fallen to the ropes, and dangerous to others. He barely even attacked Bakugo and it was Bakugo who tried to do even more back to Izuku. "I know that, but they don't. Not that it matters. Any way you act, the HPSC will view it in the way they want to." And because of that, Hawks paused for a bit, then continued in an urgent and distressed tone. "Last time they demanded I hand you and your suit over. This time they gave it as a command. So, you follow their order or you're stripped of your hero rank," Izuku said, picking on Hawks' tone. Izuku had gotten closer to Hawks, having him as a mentor, but also as one of the first heroes who believed in him. If to save Hawks' career, was Izuku wishing to hand over his suit, something he had worked so strong to make, that his father had essentially given his life for. But being a hero was only a possibility. Having Hawks and May as friends, that was here and now. Hawks huffed and drew Izuku out of his thoughts, among other things. "But don't worry, I'm not going to give you or your armor up. I'm going to talk with Principal Nezu and see if we can get you transferred to the hero course sooner. Since you're in the support department, you don't have as much leeway as the hero students and you're an easy target for the Hero Public Safety Commission," Hawks said. Izuku nodded his head then shook it. "But I'm not a hero or currently in the hero course. They're the Hero Public Safety Commission, hero. They shouldn't be able to touch me." "Normally yes, but you still go to UA, a private hero high school, and somehow they know you're trying to get transferred. They will fight tooth and nail to keep you there as a support student. They have more freedom with their jurisdiction, as laws surrounding hero students are more exact in wording." Izuku thought about that for a few seconds. Many support course students from UA were hired at hero agencies after graduation. Izuku sighed, just another thing for the HPSC to use. However, a new question came to mind. He hadn't met Hawks in the best situation. He was typically using his quirk illegally, but it didn't take much for the Hawks to come over and support Izuku. "Why are you doing all this for me? Back in Fukuoka, there were multiple times you could have turned me over. Even then you stayed for a week to teach me how to fly better. Why are you doing all this for me?" Izuku asked. Hawks quickly answered, "I have my reasons. Just know when the sports festival is done, I'll say my goodbyes and we probably won't be able to meet one-on-one as we have done in the last week," Hawks said, then began to walk away. "Hey Hawks, thanks for all you've done for me," Izuku said before Hawks left his sight. "No problem, kid," Hawks said, then walked away. As he turned the corner, he knew Izuku wouldn't see the next step coming. Hawks had acted like he would never see Izuku again. But that was the last thing Hawks was going to allow. The HPSC were hellbent on getting Hasashi's designs, and now with Izuku caught in the middle, he was target number one. It didn't matter when or how the HPSC would decide to play. Hawks was going to be next to Izuku the whole time. So now it is time to make sure that happened, and the best way to do that was to coordinate with the person that controlled most of Izuku's schedule. Hawks pulled out his phone and dialed Principal Nezu. It was quickly picked up and Principal Nezu opened with, "Good morning, Hawks. Are you proud of your student? He's done well to make himself known. I see he's taken his training to heart." "I am, but that's not why I called. Are you free to talk?" Hawks asked. A small beep went off and then Principal Nezu said, "I'm free." "Well, we're screwed. The HPSC isn't going to back down anytime soon, and now they're serious. They're commanding me to bring in Midoriya and his suit," Hawks said as he continued down the empty hallway. "Does Izuku know of the situation?" Principal Nezu asked with urgency. I told him that it was the same thing as last time, just more serious. I didn't mention the blackmail or, more importantly, how the HPSC would label Izuku as an enemy of the state. UA would be shown as harboring a national fugitive, destroying its reputation within months. Needless to say, they're serious and are willing to pull out all the bells and whistles at their disposal, Hawks said, glad that Principal Nezu understood the importance of it all. Just to get a suit of armor. That won't even work with Midoriya's quirk, Principal Nezu said as if he was musing at a joke. A joke that Hawks understood. Hisashi had the suit, he designed it and built it. But well known to those who knew that Hisashi couldn't find a power source for it to work. That's not even half of it. The military is starting to get in on it, Hawks said. One of his feather he had planted around the HPSC headquarters had caught a conversation behind the president of the HPSC and a general from the military. Now that is a surprise. The military have not been interested in Hisashi's design, so why are they throwing their hat in the ring? Principal Nezu said, leaving the question of why the military had suddenly left Hisashi alone unspoken. But now it seemed they were once again showing interest and were teaming with the HPSC to get what they wanted. Does it really matter? They want the suit. Most likely they want the suit to militarize it and use it in war. With the HPSC and military working together, there isn't much they can't do. They'll have the support of Japan's government doubled over. If we don't give them an answer in enough time or an answer that ticks them off, then they're going to send the military from Tartarus to make sure the job is done. They're going to bust down your walls and take the kid's suit, Hawks said, walking outside of the stadium and flying into the air to get some distance from the crowd. We need to talk with Powerloader and Eraserhead about getting Izuku Midoriya to the hero course. There you'll be able to keep a closer eye on him. And it will also cause a bigger issue for the HPSC when they try to move against him. You fought strong for that as principal of UA. You would have complete say over what happens with your students. The HPSC won't be able to touch Midoriya until he starts his work studies in the second year. Even then they would have to go through the hero he goes to. And that's just another barrel of monkey, but it would give us time to cover all of our bases. That is true. However, Mr. Aizawa must also agree to the transfer. We can't force Midoriya upon him, and Mr. Aizawa isn't known for doing nice things for his students, Principal Nezu said, laying out their cards. They had to be careful to play their cards right. Every day it was becoming more and more clear that more than just Izuku's life and career were at stake in this fight against the HPSC. The question is, who would you rather anger? The Hero Public Safety Commission or Eraserhead? Hawks pointed out. Principal Nezu thought about that for a moment. Mr. Aizawa was a close friend and had the respect of Principal Nezu. And Hisashi Midori did so as well. One of the few Principal Nezu would claim matched his own level of intelligence. And, well, Mr. Aizawa was always annoyed at something. And Principal Nezu would hate to give him extra on his plate. At the same time, the HPSC and now the military were making it very clear what they wanted. And though the past had become high-strung, they were now making it clear what they were willing to do to get what they wanted. So what could Principal Nezu and Hawks do to help Izuku? Principal Nezu looked down at the waiting crowd. Though the heroes were on the government's payroll through the HPSC, the group of interest that held the most power over the heroes was the public. The billboard popularity held a lot for heroes. If they were well-liked and handled fights, they were ranked higher and had a chance to be paid more and be able to do brand deals. All of that came from the public opinion on heroes. Maybe Principal Nezu could use that power to serve his own purpose. Principal Nezu looked down at a UA alumni ring that sat on his middle finger. It had been Hisashi despite not graduating from UA. He had given it to Principal Nezu just a few days before he died. It was supposed to be a meetup with a black market supplier. Yet still, he had given his right to Principal Nezu, making the white rodent think that before he even left, Hisashi knew he was going to die. While the ring in itself was nothing special, the standard gold UA alumni ring with 3 rings around the main emblem to signal support course. Yet to Principal Nezu, it was a reminder of the good Hisashi tried to do with his life. The sacrifice he had made, a life he didn't get to live in order to protect those he most cared about. I don't think I need to answer that question, Principal Nezu said in a resolute tone. Then we have an understanding. Good. Hawks hung up his phone and let out a small sigh. He generally tried to keep away from stuff like this. The HSPC already had a tight leash on him, but Hawks could see the light at the end of the tunnel, though he knew it was going to get a lot worse before it got any better. And here I thought this ended when you were lowered to your grave, Hisashi. But I think your kid is going to be an even bigger pain than you were. At least you knew how to lay low.